Hello friends. This is Fiction Quest. How are you all? So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became God in One Piece and got harem? But before we start, if you want more amazing stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, if possible, share this video with your friends. Now without wasting any more time, let's begin the story. The ritual was coming to an end. All the members of Akatsuki looked on in anticipation as the ninth eye of the statue slowly started to open. The blonde-haired boy lay there, mouth open in a silent screams as the last of his energy started to wane. The Biju in the statue were panicking. Soon they would be reunited as the Jubi, however they will lose their consciousness in the process. Something these powerful demons could not accept, for losing their consciousness in a merge is akin to death, something these immortal beings could not accept. In the statue, the demons were frantically discussing their course of action. Thought their options were limited. It's either imbue the mortal blonde with all their power, or die. The Kyuubi had grown accustomed to her host, so she wouldn't have a problem with it. The Nibi was great friends with Kyuubi, so she was okay with it as well. The problem was the Gobi and Sanbi. They were both hesitant, and all 9 were needed to override the seal. The problem was that if they wanted to live, all their powers would vanish into the blonde, making him an all-powerful being. Their souls, however, would remain, and the blonde could call them out whenever he wanted, and they would serve him. He could do whatever he wanted to, as he would be omnipotent. He would absorb all their knowledge and skills. In the end, Gobi and Sanbi reluctantly agreed with the plan, muttering something about having no choice in the matter. The Akatsuki members were suddenly on guard as a loud rumble was heard. The statue shook and the dragons stopped moving. Suddenly all the pupils in the 9 eyes disappeared as a crack came right through the middle of the statue. A low-pitched buzzing suddenly increased in pitch, before a bright light came from the statue. 9 dragons in different colors flew into Naruto, his body destroying and reforming as his soul took in the 9 demon lords. He grew taller, his muscles grew more defined. The scars on his body simply disappeared, his muscles grew denser, his face grew slimmer. The signs of long periods without food disappeared. Until suddenly, in a bright flash of light, a bright red shockwave spread out from Naruto, leaving behind an empty white void. Devoid of anything, except Naruto, laying on the ground in a peaceful sleep, his body pulsing with power as his mind and body evolved into that of a god. In Konoha, a tremble went through the entire village. A sudden oppressive energy flared through the air, as if 10 Kyubis were attacking Konoha at once. People looked at the direction whence it came from, and the usually blue sky in that direction was replaced by bright white, as if light itself came rushing towards them. As everyone ran up the village walls, they saw a red shockwave of pure energy rushing towards them at the speed of sound. The people of Konoha began to have trouble drawing breath as the air grew dense from the unimaginable energy rushing towards them. As the energy reached the village gates, all of the ninja could notice a familiar feeling to the energy. And Naruto? 20 seconds later, nothing was left of Konoha. In 3 hours the entire realm had been lost, planets, solar systems, only the white void was left, and Naruto. He looked around, feeling immensely powerful, as well as sad. He felt like he had lost something but gained something much better. He had gained incredible amounts of knowledge in the space of minutes, and as such his whole mind was in shambles. He sat down on the bright floor and meditated, organizing all the data he had received. He learned the hidden memories of the Biju, knowing that they were originally one being, a god, more powerful than Kami, Yami and the Shinigami. He also learned that because the god grew arrogant and attacked the original gods, they worked together to exile him and split him into 9 beings, the Biju. Their hatred for the gods evolved into hatred for humans, and they began committing random acts of mass destruction. He also learned that through the fusion he had now become a god. After organizing all this data, he stood up, wondering what he should do to relieve eternal boredom. Suddenly a rift in the void appeared, and out of it stepped 2 attractive girls. Had he still been a human, he would have passed out from a huge nosebleed. They were so beautiful that even those who hated perverts could not help but drool at the sight of these 2 girls. One had DD cups, long raven hair, with locks of scarlet in it, as well as revealing clothing that could only be described as lingerie with a see-through shirt over it, and a black leather miniskirt. The other had long blue hair, C cups, and a sultry smile on her face. She had bright blue eyes with a hint of mischief in them. She was wearing a simple white dress that was hugging her body quite nicely. showing off her curves in a subtle way. The black-haired woman smirked and introduced herself as Yami, while the other smiled a sincere smile, although a hint of longing could be seen in her eyes, and introduced herself as Kami. Naruto simply smiled his foxy smile at them, causing both of them to blush. Kami. Dot and Yami, to what do I owe the pleasure of meeting you two? Well, Naruto, you have just become a god. The fusing of the 9 separate-tailed beasts recreated the godly powers that we split. We hope that you have a better personality than your predecessor. We had nothing else to do, so we decided to explain your newfound powers to you. Wait, you came here only because you were bored? Isn't it kind of the duty of gods to explain the powers to new gods? The two girls simply giggled merrily, and you could see the question marks above his head. Speaking of that, why isn't Shinigami here? Oh, your ascension doesn't interest him. As for your question, gods have no duty. As a god you can do whatever you want. However, messing with the realms of the other gods is not advised, for if you do mess our realms up we will turn against you. Why would I want to mess your realms up? I'm not evil or something, just bored, and why do I interest you too, if I may ask? Kami giggled and stepped towards Naruto, coming to stand right in front of him. Gods have no obligation to do anything. I created heaven because I was bored, and because I thought it would be nice to reward people who have been good in their lives. So instead of just disappearing after life, I decided to conserve the good souls for heaven. As for why you interest us, we haven't had a young male being turned into a god for over 10,000 years. The Shinigami was old when he ascended. We find it below us to fraternize with mortals, so we're kinda lonely. Yami stepped toward Naruto as well, before beginning her story. I was once human and I was being raped my entire life. I was used over and over again, given just enough food to survive. I eventually went into shock from the sadness, so I created hell, and made the souls of every evil mortal suffer for eternity, especially the rapists. She spat out the last part, and began sobbing quietly, holding her face into her hands. She flinched as Naruto put his arms around her, before crying into his chest. He whispered small words into her ear. Relax, Yami-chan. No one can hurt you now, no one can rape you anymore. She stiffened in his arms for a minute, before grounding out through gritted teeth. What about you? He looked at her confused. What about me? You could still rape me if you wanted to. Your powers are greater than mine, remember? Yes. Yes, I could do that, but I would do it. Why? Kami looked at him in slight awe. He was denying that he would ever rape her, something no male god has ever done. Even Shinigami had pondered over it, but had decided against it. What's more was that she couldn't detect any insincerity in his voice, like he had truly never thought of it. Yami looked up in disbelief, before her shocked look turned into a glare. What are you talking about? I can feel that you want me. We are the most beautiful beings in existence. So, that doesn't mean I'm going to rape you. I hate rapists. If you had ever watched my hometown, you should have noticed that there are no live rapists in Konoha. This is because every time a human attempted to rape a woman, I killed him. It is true that I want the two of you. I would be crazy not to want you, but I won't rape, have nothing to worry about. I won't hurt you, he whispered into Yami's ear, but Kami could easily hear it. Kami resisted the urge to smile happily and glomp the new god. They had only gotten evil male gods for millions of years now. Yami looked up at him in disbelief. A powerful god that would actually practice restraint? A god that wouldn't rape her? Earlier gods had known that she was very vulnerable to rape. If a man began the raping process, her rational brain would shut down, and she could only lay there and watch as she was violated over and over again. In truth, if he wanted to rape her, she could do nothing to stop him. She had never truly had before, she had never been pleasured before, never even had she encountered an orgasm. Simply because when she was penetrated the man would hurt her in any way possible to make sure that she didn't enjoy it. Maybe she had finally found a person that she could make love to. Kami watched. She knew what Yami was thinking, but she couldn't help but be jealous at the fact that the young god was not holding her. She would have to do something about that later, she mentally giggled. Yami relaxed into his arms, blushing at the words of the young god. From the corner of her eyes she saw Kami smiling happily. Yami, I have to go, all right. I'll leave you two alone, Kami chirped, while opening a rift and disappearing. Yami-chan. Naruto spoke softly to her, bringing her out of her reverie. She once again reveled in the warmth of a body pressed against her own. For the first time this feeling was not accompanied by great amounts of pain. She liked it, and would want to stay like this for hours. She sighed contentedly before answering the young god. Yes, Naru-kun? Would it be alright for me to hold you during the rest of the explanation, or do you wish me to let go of you? She was once again shocked. Never before had she been asked what she wanted. It gave her a warm feeling, like she was safe from any harm while she was with him. She decided she liked the feeling of his warm body pressed to hers. She especially liked the fact that for the first time she could feel a pleasurable feeling without being accompanied by such horrible pain. She decided to allow him to hold her close to him whenever he wanted to. No, Naru-kun, it's alright. I like this. Naruto couldn't help but feel bad for her. He knew it wasn't his fault that she had had such a horrible life, but he couldn't ignore the fact that it was his gender that had caused him all her pain. She didn't deserve all her suffering. Yami-chan, for what it's worth, I'm deeply ashamed that my gender has caused you all this pain. I can only hope that I can make you feel comfortable around me, because I know you can never forgive the male gender for all the horrors that have been forced upon you. And for what it's worth, even though I know that I cannot speak for all men since the vast majority would have gladly raped you, I'm sorry for what they've done to you. I hope you can forgive me for my gender's sins. Yami felt her heart flutter at the first apology she had ever received. No one had ever really cared for her past. Sure, they said it was horrible for her, but she could hear the insincerity in their voices. She could feel that they just wanted to get in her pants. Naruto just seemed to truly be ashamed at what she had gone through. It was unreal, but she had never met a nicer person than him. However, Yami-chan, don't think of me as the epitome of good. I'll probably bring many realms to shambles before I turn time back in that realm so I can restore the lives lost. She nodded. She knew that it was impossible for a god to do nothing evil. It was just way too boring to live forever if you can't find things to entertain yourself. She sometimes went on random bouts of destruction, and she couldn't turn back time like he could. She was essentially more evil than he was. It was time for the explanation. She could always figure out how to have him for herself later. Alright, Naru-kun. The first thing you have to learn is to travel between different realms. While you're in a realm created by a god, you can't mess around with it as much, but you could still trash it with your massive power. If you go to a naturally existing realm, you could around with the laws of physics, manipulate the minds of everyone, make the sky green, create new animals, procure empty bodies and souls, thus creating spies for you, control time. Anything you can think of is possible. Also, I would advise against destroying the entire universe, as you don't know how good your control over time is. To move into another realm, just think of a rift leading to the realm you want to go to and claw your hand vertically through the air. This will create a portal through which you can go to the desired realm. I'll transfer the knowledge of all the realms to you now. Naruto simply blinked as massive amounts of realms were projected into his head. Eventually a realm came past his vision. It was a world with heightened levels of technology, where nations were constantly waging war against one another. He smiled and decided that he wanted to go there. He thought about a portal leading there. It was a simple door, with a swirl imprinted on it. He smiled and opened the door, but before he could walk through, Yami stopped him. Naru-kun, wait. What is it, Yami-chan? You should know that mortals are not used to seeing doors appear in the middle of the street and seeing people stepping out, right? You should form it high in the sky. Don't worry, you can fly with just a thought. She edged slightly as Naruto grabbed her closer to him, before he levitated them both into the automatically opened door. Flying through a swirl of energy, they flew out of the door on the other hand, before it automatically closed and disappeared. Alright, Yami-chan. Anything else I need to know before I start having fun with this planet? Yeah, if you focus on giving yourself an ability, it will work as long as you can specify what it is. You can shapeshift if you want to. You can create anything you wish out of thin air. Make technology up and it will work because you want it to. Manipulate anybody you wish to, and basically anything you can think of. Since you had a horrible life in your previous realm, you might want to procure a harem for yourself. I think some love will do you good, and Naruto, you must understand. Because a god was born in your realm, it has been completely destroyed and has turned into the white void it is now. You can restore it whenever you wish though, so you might want to take some revenge on your former village. She spat out the last part, indicating that she wasn't at all pleased with the way they treated him. She sighed in discontent. She really wanted to stay with the first male who had ever shown her kindness, but she knew she had to return to hell for her duties. Naru-kun. I have to go now. Sighing, he unhanded her, giving her a look she couldn't quite place. It wasn't lust, although it contained a hint of it. She didn't know the emotion he was giving off, so she decided to ask. Naru-kun, could you please tell me what that emotion in your eyes is? I promise no one will ever know and I won't think less of you whatever it is. Naruto sighed. It was truly sad for her to not even recognize that emotion. He'd have to show her later, and even though he realized that it would make her utterly dependent on him, he'd show her true love. It's love, Yami-chan, and sadness that you have to leave. How can I contact you too? She blushed fiercely, staring in disbelief at the new god. She knew he wasn't lying. She also realized that it meant that no one had ever loved her before. Sure, Kami was her friend, but she was always a bit cool towards her, and she'd never shown her any emotion remotely like this. She realized with a dreamy smile that Naruto-kun loved her, and she knew that she loved him. However, she also realized that he was really her only chance to be loved instead of just desired. She felt even sadder knowing that she still had to leave him for her duties in hell. She hadn't checked up on them in months. Naru-kun, I think I'll love you too. I will come see you in a week. I need to think for a while. Naruto watched her with a fluttering feeling in his heart. He had never seen the emotion in her eyes either, which means that no one had ever loved him before. He suddenly realized that Yami had never told him how to contact her, and he decided to wait for her arrival, after he made some preparations. Naruto flew over the ocean, nearing America. Yes, he's on Earth right now, however none of the important people or brands will be included. I'm simply using names of places and the general geography so that you can all understand his actions easier. When he suddenly stopped just out of international waters, he decided to place an island here. He raised his hand and an island the size of Luxembourg appeared. Feeling pleased with himself, and wondering if he could truly go eternity without being bored with such massive capabilities, he created a palace and a minor city in front of it, as well as filling the island with everything he may need. He decided to spend the next week finding an expert on every field of science that this realm had to offer. After finding out about this thing called the internet and computers, he had researched every field of science that existed, as well as their respective experts and where they lived. Naruto teleported himself to their residences and absorbed their knowledge because he wanted to be able to absorb knowledge. In reality, it only took him 4 days to learn about everything in this world. Afterwards, he began decorating his huge palace, which took him just enough time to walk through the palace in 2 times, which was about a day. He then created servants, soulless humans, stronger and smarter than them in every way, and completely obedient and infatuated with him. They were all in the forms of several very attractive women. The kind that any man would kill for, literally. Furthermore, he gave his almost unmatched cooking skills, which he had taken from this world's best chefs, and he supplied an almost limitless supply of ingredients. As he was comfortably settled, he wondered what he would do with all the time he had. Deciding to ask Ichibi no Shukaku for any ideas, he gave him a body and called his soul out. I'm finally free. I'm gonna kill you. H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A. Naruto's sweat dropped and undid the body, muttering, "Damn psychopath Tanuki's yelling in my ear." Moving up to the next of the tailed beasts that were now his minions, he called in Nibi, who manifested in the form of a catgirl with blonde hair to her shoulders and white ears along with 2 white tails, skimpy thin white clothes on her body, her shirt barely containing her large assets. Her hourglass figure was obviously visible as the only clothing she wore was a top, exposing her stomach, and a miniskirt. Nibi simply blinked, surprised that she had been called out, and then she looked at Naruto, her eyes instantly turning into hearts while a deep blush adorns her face. Before she regained her composure, a low tingling in her stomach reminding her how she felt about her master. "What is it, master?" she asked him, a sultry smile on her face that could melt any male. Naruto simply chuckled good-heartedly, reminding her that he already knew how she felt about him since he had all her knowledge, which made her blush. "Anyway, Nibi, I have settled in this world, and now I have nothing to do. Do you have any good ideas?" Nibi looked contemplative for a moment before giving a seductive smile, as she sauntered over to him, pressing her body up against his. "I do. But why don't we have some fun first, master?" she said, lust and the beginnings of love clear in her voice as she waited for his answer. Naruto nodded, and with a thought the palace shifted and a bedroom appeared around them. A king-size bed surrounded by candles and special incense, which would increase any lust. He eyed her deeply while using one hand on the back of her head, and the other to caress her firm backside, watching as she turned into putty in his hands. It seemed, was an activity he would indulge in many times during his endless life as a god. The next morning, laying in the immeasurably soft bed, Nibi, snuggled deeper into Naruto's godly body. She had never, ever in her long life been so satisfied. He had literally ed her till she dropped and she loved every minute of it. She was glad that she made the decision to help out and imbue her powers into the young god. Her life was finally taking an interesting turn after years of boredom within Ni Yugito. Master, I have a couple of ideas on what you could do. You could be an underground's crime boss, taking out everyone that matters from the shadows, or you could. Her eyes lit up with a burning lust as she uttered her next sentence, which ended with a lustful sigh. Go for world domination, either through an army of weird technology or with your own massive powers. Naruto chuckled. Nibi had a fetish for men who dominated things, and it is safe to say that if you dominate the world you'll make her so horny that she'll rape you if she'll have to. She will have with you, many, many times. He would do that, not that the young god was whipped. Far from it, in fact Nibi is basically his, a really hot really why. With, but nothing can emulate the level of the with a woman that wants you really, really bad, and besides it would be fun. Naruto summoned the souls of 3 legendary ninja that were now dead, and temporarily took away their free will. He summoned 3 root Anbu, knowing he could use their skills at information gathering. You 3, go scout all the military capabilities of the lands to the east called America. Make sure no one notices you. I have enhanced your abilities 100 times. I expect you back in 3 days. Do not worry, I have given you a mental map as to where to find the intelligence, and I have given you the ability to move at the speed of light. Now go. After a chorus of, "Hi," they suddenly disappeared. The next morning, day 7, Naruto missed Yami. He missed her enough to create an exact replica of her, although it had no soul and could not move on its own. He decided to take a nap after looking towards the replica with longing, and he drifted off into a troubled sleep, filled with longing for Yami. While Naruto was asleep, a rift opened in Naruto's bedroom and Yami walked out, her heart fluttering because she would finally see Naruto again, but she suddenly froze. The room smelled heavily of, and in front of Naruto's bed stood a perfect replica of her. Her heart broke. Naruto had a version of her that didn't come with the emotional scars and still had a perfect body. He didn't need her anymore, he wouldn't want her, his love for her had ceased. Why would he ever choose an emotional scarred beauty over the same beauty who did not have that fault? She couldn't stand that her only chance at love had been taken away just because she had to go and leave him to check on Hell. She could have been in his bed with him, happy for eternity, but now she had absolutely nothing. She broke down and sank to the ground crying her heart out. Naruto-kun didn't need her anymore. 5 minutes later Naruto woke up to the sounds of a girl crying in an angelic voice, which he instantly realized was Yami. He opened his eyes and looked towards the origin of the sound, where he saw Yami sobbing loudly on the floor. He quickly got out of bed and picked Yami off the floor, hugging her tightly. His joy to see her temporarily forgotten because she was crying. Yami-chan, what's wrong? Why are you crying? Did something happen? Yami flinched when he touched her. Her mind was running at 1,000 miles an hour. Why does he care? He has her body after all. She looked up at him in sadness, before whispering out between sobs, I am sad because I missed my only chance at true love. When I was gone you created her, didn't you? She said, pointing towards the replica. At his nod she continued, and after that you had with her, didn't you? You would never choose me over her because I come with emotional scars. I have lost my only chance at love with you, Naruto. Don't you understand why I'm sad? I'm heartbroken. She was now frantically holding on to him, desperately afraid of him letting her go, and afraid that the love in his eyes would be gone, replaced only by empty lust. He tilted her chin up, so she was forced to look him in the eyes, causing her fear to rise even higher, before she finally froze when she saw the look of love only strengthened in his eyes. No sign of him rejecting her heir apparent, and then he spoke. That's not true, Yami-chan. I did not have with that replica of yours, and even if I had I still would not choose it over you. I'm not like most men. I am not in love with just your body and the pleasure it may bring. I am in love with you as a person, the entire you. I created that replica simply because I missed you bad. Her eyes brightened with hope as she heard him speak, her heart slowly but surely mending back together as she realized that there was still hope for her own happiness, and she vowed to do anything as long as there was still a chance. Really, Naru-kun? Of course, Yami-chan. Would I lie to you, if I, as you said, didn't need you? Why would I comfort you? Why would I tell you that I love you if I did not and I could still have with you? I love you, Yami-chan. She smiled happily as tears of joy ran down her cheeks. crying in happiness she thought she would never have. Thank you, Naru-kun. Thank you so much, no one has ever loved me. Naruto smiled warmly at her as a devious idea popped into his mind. He brought his mouth to her ear before whispering softly, "If no one has ever loved you, allow me brighten your day." And as her eyes widened, his lips suddenly met hers in a fierce, passionate that made her weak in the knees, all the remnants of sadness disappearing instantly as they were replaced with burning love so intense that she could be considered enthralled. As air became a necessity, Naruto broke the as Yami seemed unwilling to, briefly forgetting that as a god he didn't necessarily need air if he didn't wish it. He held her close and laid her down on the bed with him, feeling her tense. He figured that she thought he was going to rape her despite his earlier promise not to. Even though it wouldn't actually be rape, as she would enjoy it, the shock was enough to briefly shock her out of her love-induced daze. "Don't worry, Yami-chan. I'm not going to rape you, we're not even going to have. I am simply still tired, and I want you to sleep with me tonight. No doubt you have never been in a bed with another man without pain, and I want to be the first one to grant you that pleasure. Unless you're not willing, Yami-chan." His voice turned sad at the last sentence, and she felt immensely reassured by his soothing presence. She briefly wondered if she could make this last forever. He was right, though. She had never been in bed with a man without it being accompanied by vicious rape that filled her whole mortal life. Her cheeks flared in a deep blush as she was now sure that she loved him. He was the first male being ever to treat her as more than a pet. "Naru-kun, why are you so perfect? Please don't let this all be a dream." Naruto actually looked surprised at this, as she squeezed him tightly as to reassure herself that he was there with her. "Perfect, Yami-chan? I am by no means perfect. I hold a deep grudge against my former village, except for a select few that lived in it. I just think that a woman, no matter how desirable, should not be treated like a piece of dirt. I'm actually half tempted to turn back time in your original realm just to torture those men endlessly. It is only natural for me to want to make those I love happy, isn't it?" She sighed with content and happiness and allowed herself to drift off to sleep, having the first pleasant dream in ages, instead of the usual nightmares of her being raped. She felt safe in his embrace, his arms wrapped protectively around her. Next morning, Yami woke up slowly, stifling a scream as she felt Naruto shift. Her head was pressed into his chest. She frantically looked for a way to escape, only to notice that her lower entrances weren't sore, and there were no wounds on her body, meaning that she wasn't raped last night. She felt his intoxicating body heat against her, and even though she was awake, she felt no desire to leave his embrace after he hadn't betrayed her trust and done anything to her while she was asleep. She tilted her head up to look in the peaceful face of a sleeping Naruto. She just lay there for a while, gazing upon him with love as she admired his perfectly built face, and she couldn't stop herself from ing him. Naruto woke up to a sudden soft and warm feeling on his lips. Groaning from the pleasurable touch coupled with the two mounds pressed tightly against his chest, he allowed his tongue to dart forward into her mouth, startling her and making her at the same time as his tongue caressed the inside of her mouth, causing her to melt into the embrace. After about 3 hours of ing, a quite lengthy session, he broke the and stared at her with love in his eyes. "Good morning, Yami-chan. Have you slept well? I hope my presence has not given you nightmares?" Her eyes glazed over in happiness at his apparent concern for her well-being, before she answered him in a voice so happy that it had never been heard from her before. "Naru-kun, that was amazing. I have never slept better. You even kept my usual nightmares away, and even though I was startled when I woke up, your warm body pressed firmly against mine felt amazing." "Yes, it did feel quite nice. Regardless, I am truly happy that you've slept so well, and I'm glad that you're becoming comfortable around me. Now let me ask you a question. Yesterday I told you I loved you, and now I want to know, do you love me in return? If my love is not wished, and if it is a burden, I will stop pursuing your love. I do not want to make you feel uncomfortable in any way." Once again she was shocked that he actually asked her what she wanted. Nobody has ever asked for her love, they simply demanded her body, and nobody has ever offered to back down if she didn't wish it. She could actually feel her love for the young god growing in leaps and bounds. There is no way that she would let this one chance at true happiness go, and she noticed she was even slightly looking forward to the moment when he would take her as his. Squashing that thought with a mental boulder, she blushed as she replied, her voice husky from all the love and suppressed lust. "No, Naruto-kun, I love you too, and I feel I am truly lucky that I have found someone as perfect and loving as you. You have given me a chance at love and have asked nothing in return. I think I would do anything for you." He looked at her with love, pleased at her answer but also slightly wary of her complete devotion, but decided to disregard it in favor of more pressing matters. Thank you so much, Yami-chan. I too have never known the joy of love during my mortal life. I'm glad that I'm finally loved and by something so much better than a mere mortal. May I then ask one thing of you, Yami-chan? Of course, anything, Naru-kun. Stay with me for a couple of days. I realize that I cannot or will not want you with me at all times, since it would our life monotone and bland, but I want you to visit at least once every week. Because I'll miss you otherwise. I understand, Naru-kun. Male gods are known to not be able to stay monogamous, and they will always have a harem, otherwise they'll go insane and kill everything. And even though we are in love, I will not be mad at you if you have with innumerable other females. Simply because I love you, it is known to be dangerous for you to be held down in a one-on-one relationship for too long, and as long as you love me, I don't mind if you pursue other relationships. I don't want to mess up this shot at love by being possessive of you, since many god-goddess relationships have ended because of that. Later, 1:30 p.m. in the throne room, Naruto sat making out with Yami in his lap, who was currently withering in the pleasurable sensations from the man she loved. Suddenly, though, he stopped eyeing her and she dazedly looked at him to see his eyes trained on something else. She looked at it, her mind still not completely recovered from its daze. In the throne room, a squad of soldiers had entered, all carrying the emblem of the USA, all adorning their full battle gear, looking apprehended at the burning gaze sent their way. How dare you interfere with a special moment between Yami-chan and me? Identify yourself, mortals. He ground out in an otherworldly voice that sent shivers up their spines, as his eyes glowed blood red, causing some to raise their weapons. He glared at them, causing them to freeze in their actions. One of the Marines, apparently the leader, stepped forward, attempting to dismantle the situation. I am Captain Parker of the 3rd Recon Squad of the U.S. Army. We were ordered to investigate an island that has appeared out of nowhere, although it seems that this island was unpopulated since the town was empty. We also discovered that there are extreme amounts of natural resources available here. And what gave you the right to enter my palace or my island for that matter? One of the more delinquent Marines stepped forward, a wise smirk on his face. Shut up, idiot. We're the ones armed around here. Maybe we should have some fun with your pretty little thing over there to teach you a lesson. After this statement, the entirety of the squad gained greedy expressions on their faces except for the captain of the squad, and Yami's eyes widened in horror and she started shivering in his arms. No, Naruto, help me. Help me. Kill them, please. Don't let them have me. Naruto's eyes glowed brighter and an aura of death seemed to appear around him, giving the Marines trouble drawing breath as they experienced their own death at his hands in thousands of different ways. You dare threaten my love with rape? This will be considered an act of war. You insolent mortals have doomed your country and signed your own death warrants. He lifted his hands and pointed towards the squad, and in the time span of a second all but the captain were wiped away in a giant blast that completely vaporized their remains, before the wall of the palace repaired itself, seeming to gather matter from out of nowhere. He turned his burning gaze to the captain of the late 3rd Recon Squad and hissed out. Leave now, mortal, before I change my mind about letting you live, and tell your leaders that the end of your country will come, simply because your squad couldn't keep their hormones in check. The captain looked on in horror as his squad was decimated due to their attitude towards this man's woman, and he ran away as fast as he could, stepping into the army boat they came with, setting off quickly to warn his leaders. Naruto was not stupid. From the distance to their mainland it would take 3 days at least to get there by boat. Meaning that America would be warned mere minutes before his attack hit. Plans forming into his mind dissipated, however, as his thoughts returned to his love, still shivering in fear of the man he just destroyed. Fear to be raped again. He wrapped his arms tightly around her, allowing her to cry into his chest as he muttered soothing words to her. He had planned to wait a little before asserting his dominance, but with this kind of insults from the petty mortals he could not wait any longer. They will fall. Later that day, 4 p.m., 3 ninjas phased into the room, backpacks bursting with detailed reports on every one of the enemy's military assets. After most of the reporting was done, they got to the part about nuclear weapons. And as Naruto drew up the knowledge on the inner workings of such weapons, he realized that they might be a problem, so using his powers over the laws of physics he temporarily disabled nuclear energy on Earth. He didn't want to turn off all stars permanently. For his forces he decided on using crystals imbued with a small sliver of his power. which was everlasting, and made them in a way that should a mortal come into contact with the crystal, or if it was removed from its place in the war machines, the crystal would immediately disintegrate, taking the war machine along with it, giving them no chance to salvage his technology. He also imbued the war weapons with highly advanced sentient spirits, bent on serving him and him only, so his weapons couldn't be hijacked either. For the infantry, he created souls with ninja training, imbued with the powers of the three-pronged Sharingan to enable them to aim perfectly. He gave them highly advanced armor, powered by the crystals embedded in their bodies, which would dissipate again when they died. He created guns that could shoot a solid ray of destructive energy, which could be operated only with chakra, which these humans did not possess. He gave them immense chakra stores so they could be able to operate the guns. For the war machines there for now, Mantis. Small, slightly larger than the average human, shaped like a praying mantis with energy blades that could form at any time and cut through anything. Its fingers are armed with the same energy beams from the guns that can pierce through anything. Its armor was pure white, while its eyes glow a dark green. It is extremely agile, and able to consistently run at 50 miles per hour for at least 48 hours before it would need a 15-minute pause. Primera. Larger, tank-sized. Shaped like a hovercraft. Hovers 1 foot of the ground, not suited for combat in rubble due to its low acceleration. It cannot dodge blows well, even though its top speed is 200 miles per hour, due to a special mass accelerator unit placed on all emission surfaces. For close combat it features 2 turrets that fire twin laser beams that can cut clean through a tank in one hit. Its main purpose, however, are its large cannon that can rotate at nearly any angle and fires a beam of aurora energy, which disintegrates anything without water in it, and instantly brings any water to a boil, causing such things to violently combust if they are further than 5 meters away from the Primera, at which point the beam reaches the right frequency, i.e. human bodies, air, lakes, water pipes, etc. And its second main function is a small communications probe that can telepathically transmit tactical information to all allied forces in the area. The probe can travel at 100 miles per hour while not attached to the Primera, and contrary to its main unit, it has great agility and can dodge almost any blow. The probe is basically a ball filled with eyes on every side, as well as heat detection, night vision and overall detection of human life. It also features a small turret that fires marking bugs, which act like a tiny needle that will bury itself into the target's body, after which he can be tracked for up to 72 hours before it wears off, and the needle dissipates into a deadly poison. Talon. Very large, egg-shaped battle cruisers, able to hold any altitude desired. It can move underwater if desired and can reach a top speed of Mach 9. During battle, though, it slows down to speeds ranging from 0 to 100 miles per hour, for bombardment and chases respectively. Armed with multiple weapons such as the ion cannons, firing a ray of positively charged ions at the target. Afterwards it releases a giant burst of negative energy, which will discharge in a powerful lightning strike with a current of 500 million volts, instantly killing or frying any human or mechanical target hit. Or the rocket pods. Roughly 500,000 missile pods will open on the Talon, raining an infinite supply of small antimatter missiles down, each strong enough to vaporize a house. For protection it deploys an energy shield that is maintained by 5 different sentient spirits. The shield can cover the entire Talon, or the spirits can activate only a small part which is in danger. The rocket pods cannot fire if the shields completely cover the Talon. Talons are able to carry other forces and can send off pods located at the sides of the cruiser to offload the troops without having to land. Able to carry and release the Locust unit. The Talon is about as large as a cruise ship, but slightly higher. Their hull can be modified to take on any color, but is mostly kept pure white. Some parts on the hull may be fluorescent. The Talon is the main unit of Naruto's army and as such has a palace under the top part of the hull, which can be switched out with a hull made of a material that can be looked through as if it were glass, yet is harder to scratch than it is to break diamonds. The top part of the hull can also be dematerialized and stored in the rim that separates the 2 parts of the hull. The ship is in this condition still protected as the reflector shields will still activate. Can be used as a boat, submarine, subterranean vehicle, ground vehicle, low hovering, airship and spaceship. Can withstand any temperature or pressure. Locust. Small car-sized, UFO-shaped jets. Armed with only a single weapon, one of the only in the army with widespread destruction capabilities. Inside of the Locust is a crystal over 20 times too big for its relative size. It is therefore imbued with much more power. This is utilized in the incredible agility and speed of the Locust, as well as mainly in the destructive capabilities. The locusts can turn or stop completely in mere seconds, and can travel at twice the speed of a typical fighter jet. When it attacks, it forces a large amount of energy from the crystal through a filter, which turns it into pure destructive energy, or Yuki, which is then forced out of its barrel at the speed of light, causing an explosion ranging from moderately sized to huge, depending on the amount of energy used. Locusts are mainly used in swarms, ranging from 50 to 400. Are usually carried in talons due to their higher speed. Medic. Small, extremely agile and fast, made from a non-reflecting material that makes them completely black, except for the blue glow in its eyes. Shaped like a normal human with a jump pack, the medic is imbued with the godly powers of creation, allowing them to repair all the war machines without having to be in contact with them, as well as create new smaller ones, such as locusts, mantis and primera. Its only means of defense are a very powerful shield, and 3-4-inch long energy claws, which can make them deadly in close combat. Atlas. The Atlas is a 4 stories tall robotic being with 6 arms. It is equipped with several weapon arrays, ranging from hundreds of turrets that fire destructive beams of light, to 3,000 rocket pods that fire an infinite supply of antimatter missiles. The Atlas are behemoths of intense strength not made for travel. It can be broken of in nanoparticles and stored within the Talon battleship. Each Talon can only carry 3 of these at a time, due to their massive size. Prometheus. The ultimate weapon of the army, Prometheus is a pure white satellite in orbit around planet Earth. Invisible by cloaking shield, none of the people have even noticed it yet. It will fire an enormous blast of energy that will cause temperatures in the target zone to rise to 7,000 degrees. It also has a secondary function that attracts asteroids from space and fires them at the target area. It is operated via mental command by Naruto, and it can fire 5 times at maximum radius before needing a reload from Naruto. After having created 50 Talon battleship loaded to the brim with forces, each Talon contained 500 mantis, 300 primera, 250 locusts, 100 medics, 3 Atlas as well as 1,000 of his infantry. He mentally commanded them to hide under the waters around the island. His work finally done, it took him a day to work it all out. He went to the throne room and created a giant 150 TV with huge speakers, even though he just wanted to watch the news. Flipping the channels at his huge TV with every channel in existence, finally finding the news, he simply listened. Earlier this week, a small country-sized island has simply appeared out of nowhere. Recon teams are being sent from all over the world, and while no message has been received from the teams sent by the USA, satellite images have shown that a large palace along with a minor city and bountiful amounts of gold and oil are present. Earlier yesterday, our satellites detected a powerful spike of a yet unknown energy, which held no determinable frequency. This energy spike was accompanied by a giant red beam of light coming out of the palace, and continuing on for a yet undetermined distance, even though it's definitely more than 30,000 miles. This energy spike is regarded as a potentially hostile action, and recon teams are therefore armed with heavy gear to deal with any potential threats. Scientists are researching the strange energy spike and patterns to see if this could be used to solve the world's current energy problems. More on this as the story unfolds. In other news, it seems that nuclear plants all around the whole planet have simply stopped functioning earlier this week. No cause has been pointed out as of yet, and the problem has gone unsolved. Scientists are at a loss, and they state that for all intents and purposes nothing is broken in the plants, and even if they replicate the process, the atoms just don't split. Even as we speak, research continues, and we will keep you updated as developments arise. This is Martha Baker, for Channel 3 News. If she exists, it's a coincidence. Naruto chuckled maliciously, causing Yami, currently seated in his lap, to smile at him. She could still remember the first time she conquered a world. She had truly felt alive, and she was glad that she would be able to be with her love during this interesting time. He looked at her and smiled a foxy smile that made her blush before he laid a soft on her lips, her content sigh not missed by anyone. Never before had she been so happy, and she was sure that she didn't deserve all the kindness that he bestowed upon her. After all, she was so used to being just a toy, she had begun to see herself as lower than most. But even if she thought herself unworthy of his love, she was for the first time in her immortal life truly happy, and she intended to do whatever it takes to hold his love for her intact, vowing to herself not to make a fuss about things like cheating. The time had come. If his forces leave now, then America will have 5 hours to prepare for the attack. Naruto placed an invisible but unbreakable barrier around his island, and created a vehicle for himself. He ordered his talons to attack cities around the country in pairs of 3 to 6 depending on the size of the city, guaranteeing a fast conquest of the USA. As they took off, he teleported to New York. I dunno, do I have to disclaim that I don't own New York? Walking among the people, who were staring strangely at him, men with distrust, and women with lust. He flew up from the ground, causing men to yell in fear, and some women to scream, while others just continued looking dreamily at him, blushes on their faces. He settled on the top of a 30-story building, watching in amusement as people were staring at him in shock from another building. He then disabled every way of long-distance communication, or rather he disabled all the machines. He would still be able to hear. Except for New York, he wanted the police to squirm a little. He was sitting in a precarious position, laying there on a balcony without proper fencing, his legs dangling from the edge, watching the sky as his forces inevitably drew nearer. Suddenly an amplified voice boomed from the ground. Hey, you get down from there, it's dangerous. He simply looked up, a bored expression set on his face, although they couldn't make it out, before he replied in a bored tone. Shut up, old man. Leave me alone. His voice was amplified by his godly powers, leaving the officers on the ground wondering how they could hear him speak, before they realized what he said and instantly became angry. They didn't know, however, that he was just playing with them. He had already placed an impenetrable barrier around the city of New York, making it impossible to leave, but entering was still possible. Leading everyone who was already in a panic because of the communications shutout, create a panic once they entered New York to check on their families. The officers sent an arrest team into the building, tasked with the apprehension of this man. It was illegal to commit suicide, and that is what it looked like he was about to do. 5 minutes later, a door burst open on the roof with a dull clank, revealing 6 officers with guns poised. They looked around warily before spotting the boy, now sitting up, swinging his legs in a playful manner, as if he was going to fall at any moment now. Startled, they slowly moved closer, while yelling at the kid not to do it. He glanced at them in confusion, before calling out to them. Don't do what? I'm not doing anything. In disbelief they watched the boy. He didn't seem at all depressed, but then why was he sitting in a place where a single wrong move could end his life prematurely? Listen, kid. You need to get away from the edge. Don't you know how high up we are? If you fall, you'll surely die. Naruto feigned innocence, and leaned forward over the edge, as if to look down. A hidden smirk adorned his face, as he acted like he slipped, falling of the edge to the horror of the 6 men gathered on the roof, as well as the small platoon on the ground as they saw the kid fall towards the ground at a frightening pace, eliciting screams from all who saw as he hit the ground. However, instead of becoming a bloody smear on the pavement, a small crater appeared in the ground, dust blocking the view of what was going on. Shocked, the officers stood frozen as a soft, but evil laughter emanated through the deadly quiet streets, and as the dust settled they saw the young man from earlier dusting off his pants, a merry smile on his face. His sudden voice broke the tension, allowing the cops to move for themselves once more. "Aw, that was fun. You should have seen the look on your faces when I fell. Priceless." The apparent leader was the first to regain his nerve, and spoke to the boy in an odd, but scared voice. "How are you alive? You just fell from a skyscraper." The boy merely raised an eyebrow before shooting the man a disarming smile, before answering. "Oh, that, I can't die, it's impossible. You can rip my heart out, crush my brains, or shoot me in the face, it doesn't do anything. You really think I would let myself fall if it would kill me?" A police commissioner that had just arrived and saw the entire thing grinned under his mask. If he would give this boy to the science department of the FBI, he would get a hefty promotion for sure. He walked up to Naruto, and twisted his arm behind his back while proclaiming in an authoritative voice. "Get in the car, hotshot, you're coming with us." Naruto's amused face suddenly turned into one of outrage. How dare these lowly humans touch him? He vaporized the man, while grinding out in a voice filled with hatred, his voice easily discernible even over the cries of surprise, anger and fear at the loss of their commissioner. "How dare you touch me, human? Trying to use me as a experiment for dissection? I shall ask Yami to torture your soul once you arrive in hell." Suddenly he gained an eerie smile on his face, before he continued his speech, although at a much lower volume. "And I will make sure that the rest of this city will join you in death." With that sentence finished, he disappeared from sight. Eliciting cries of surprise from all the cops around him, he grew 4-feet-long energy claws on each hand, and without once reappearing in the sight of the humans he sliced them all up. Leaving just one man to breathe rasping breaths as one of the claws had pierced his lung, and he was now slowly suffocating on his own blood. He was the only one to see Naruto reappear, a scary smirk adorning his face as the energy claws disappeared. The officer tried to glare at him, but in his present state he didn't look quite as threatening as he may have wished. What are you? Naruto's smirk widened, and he spoke intoning his sentence with so much divine power that half the continent must have heard it. I am a god. The man recoiled in obvious fear of the voice that held so much power it made him want to run and hide. Alas, he couldn't do it because he was laying on the floor in a puddle of his own blood. Naruto smirked, his eyes flashed, and suddenly a giant guillotine blade appears in the air, and smacked down with incredible speed, bisecting the man from crotch to head, his tortured scream being ended almost as soon as it begun, leaving gore all around the man. Naruto's face turned neutral before a malicious chuckle escaped his lips. He figured it was time to begin the destruction of New York. He decided to begin with the Statue of Liberty. It was fitting to first destroy all that represented their liberty before he crushes them into the waiting arms of Shinigami. Flying over to the statue at a moderate pace, with black angel wings he made to give them some kind of warning, as well as to gather them so they could see their own hopes shatter. After 3 hours the entire shore was black with people, as well as several boats and helicopters, reporting the event live in the entire country because he had allowed signals from New York to reach everyone. He was in a full close-up, everyone could see his wings flap slowly to keep him in place. Slowly he turned one eye to the camera and grinned a mischievous grin, making innumerable females of all ages blush and stare dreamily. The reporters were confused as their cameras suddenly zoomed out on their own accord, while the young man held up his hand as if he was going to chop someone in the neck, and his other hand to his side, open wide as a ball of white energy appeared in his hand. Everyone was looking at him in intense wonder and amazement. Suddenly, as if he decided to do something else, the hand he held in the air suddenly clenched around seemingly nothing, until a white fedora with a black lint around it appeared in his hand and he put it on. Around his body a pure white cloak appeared, while his upper torso was covered in a tight black muscle shirt. Around his neck was a pure black necklace with a symbol of 2 white wings wrapped around the sun. His wings turned white and turned into 6 wings pointing out at different angles. A halo appeared over his head, and increased in glow until a godly light surrounded him. His pants were dark blue, with a black belt with a silver belt buckle with the kanji for God, giving off a soft white light. He lowered his hand, before addressing them all. America in its entirety was listening intensely as the heavenly blonde spoke. People of America, you have committed sins against me for too long now, and it's enough. I was content to leave you alone for long enough now. Time and time again I have watched as you went against everything I stand for, killing each other in increasing quantities, fighting amongst each other all the while destroying this beautiful planet that has been gifted to you. Stealing from each other, destroying lives just for a mere $10. Polluting this planet all because you are too lazy to invent technology that gives you what you want without destroying the environment. Releasing atomic bombs on this planet, uncaring if the plant life or the animals suffer. Viewing yourself as superior creatures just because you have rational thoughts. And worst of all, people of America, is the rape. Thousands of women's lives are destroyed each day just because you fools have not the decency to keep your desire in check. Stealing food to live is something I can understand, but taking something that destroys another's life while you do not really need it is unacceptable. Now I know I have let this go on for thousands of years even while I was bored, and I know better than you do how enjoyable the pleasure of a woman's flesh is, and I know I enjoy it daily, with many different women. But I would never take a woman against her will, no matter how weak and puny she may be compared to me. All the women I've had love me and only me, and if they would object then I would willingly let them leave. Yesterday a recon team of the U.S. Army, representatives of your country, entered my domain and my palace. They entered my quarters where I was making out with Yami, a poor soul who has been raped her entire mortal life until she became a goddess. And they foolishly threatened to rape my woman. At that moment I knew what I had to do. You have gone too far this time. I am a god, and this. He raised his hand, and slashed it diagonally downwards towards the Statue of Liberty. Immediately the statue was bisected at the waist and the island behind it was as well. He quickly followed up with another hand. Flat palm pointed towards the falling statue, and a large beam of white light blasted through it, vaporizing it in its entirety. Is your punishment? Your precious liberty shall be taken away until you can irrefutably prove to me that your kind deserves its freedom and can change its ways. I will add a new law of nature that makes any rapists die immediately. Now you foolish mortals, submit, or die." Cries of fear and outrage could be heard clearly from the shore. The women of the population were torn. Their hearts were willing to follow this young god, but they just couldn't. Hesitantly they joined in on the cries of outrage, but their inner war was not missed by the young god, and he responded in kind. "Then you will not submit. Pity. For all those who in their heart wish to submit, for you death shall only be temporary, for the others enjoy hell-s." With that said, Naruto created a new warrior class, inspired by his original realm, the ninja. Ninja. Human-sized shadow warriors, a dull non-reflective black color except the joints, fingers, feet, eyes and a single vertical line along the torso. Aforementioned spots glow a dark red color. Clad in bulletproof armor that will simply deflect the bullets without denting. Fastest and most agile of all the ground forces, able to reach speeds up to 300 miles per hour within a second with relative ease. Slowing down and evading is no different matter. Ninja are equipped with infinite amounts of holy shuriken and kunai, which can penetrate an entire human body with ease. The ninja is also equipped with a large dark red energy blade, over 4 feet in length on each arm, sprouting out from their bracers, have the ability to channel chakra for supplemental skills, such as water walking and tree walking. He created over 200 of these who simply stood completely still in front of him. He smirked at them and said, "Kill them all." Every ninja shot out 2 energy blades from their blades and in a chorus of, "Hi." They all vanished, while the ninja were taking care of all the people. Naruto decided to join in and do some property damage. Since the ninja weren't really equipped to be able to destroy buildings, he swept down into the city, adorning a form more suited for combat. He created a jetpack on his back since using his powers to fly would distract him slightly from his fun time. His cloak and shirt disappeared, and his hands were covered with eerie black gloves that radiated darkness. This left him in only his pants, his black gloves and his white hat, with his jetpack on his back. He flew up to the top of the highest building he could find and quickly flew down along the side of the building. He created an energy beam out of his arm that was 300 meters long. And angling arms diagonally downwards, he began to cut the skyscraper into even slices. That, due to the angle of the cut, soon rocketed downwards, causing craters to form and buildings to collapse. He then resumed his flight in a horizontal position, angled slightly upwards as he was heading for another skyscraper. In the middle of the building, he stuck out his hand forward, and shot out a large white beam of energy that left a gaping hole in the tower before he flew through the hole as it was starting to collapse around him. Reforming his energy blade, only this time on both his hands as he stuck out both his arms to the sides, he began to fly in between various buildings while doing corkscrews, mangling the buildings into a mess of large, weird-shaped slices as they sent pieces of the building flying in different directions. He used his powers to lift up all large loose objects in the city, before sending them crashing down, making all the people still alive gape in disbelief as it rained cars and buses, and the occasional tank. Buildings groaned in protest as large metal objects slammed into them, breaking their share of glass windows. None of the buildings fell though, but they were certainly damaged. Suddenly Naruto saw a large group of police screaming in hysteria as they pointed their weapons at him. He decided to freak them out before they died and he summoned his cloak and shirt as he landed, but not before creating a large fiery explosion in front of them, setting the ground aflame, and hiding him in the smoke. Some of the officers shouted in surprise as they saw a shadow of him walking through the flames calmly, his cloak fluttering in non-existent winds. He walked with extra theatrics, slow and with extra sway, intimidating the police even more. As the shadow became clearer, they started shaking in fear, their aim no longer being steady. Naruto focused his gaze on one officer in the very back. He stopped time completely, watching as everything but him became deathly still. Naruto formed an energy blade in one of his hands, cleanly decapitating the 10 officers closest to him, watching as they remained still, a clean line in the middle of their necks being the only signs that they were in fact dead. Naruto added in a small explosive in the brains of everyone except for the one officer in the back. Detonating them, he noticed that it seemed like nothing happened, making sure to remain completely still during the exchange, not giving the one remaining officer any clue that he did anything. He let time resume its normal flow. watching as blood spurted in fountains out of the heads of the first 10, while their bodies fell limp to the ground. And he just kept walking as the heads of the rest exploded in a dance of red gore. Dull thumps were heard as they hit the ground. The last officer let out a scream as Naruto calmly continued a slow gait towards him, frozen as his body wouldn't listen to his brain's command to run. He held up a pistol and shot it multiple times, riddling Naruto with bullets of hot lead. However, he didn't even flinch as the bullets hit him, and after choosing the weirdest method of regeneration, the bullets were simply pushed out of his body, making the officer soil his pants in fear. Thinking his fun with this city was done, Naruto simply killed the officer before destroying all his ninja troop, with more than half of the city left intact. He left the city and stood a little ways out of the city before he gave a mental command to Prometheus. In Earth's orbit, a large white satellite shaped like a cylinder narrowing in increments before at the tip a large blue glowing crystal could be seen. Suddenly the crystal turned orange and the satellite held still in orbit until it was positioned right above the city of New York, at which point a pulse of power distorted reality around the satellite before a large orange burst of energy fired from the crystal, its beam widening steadily as it neared the city with its blast of heat that would destroy the city. Back on Earth, the sky right above the city suddenly turned orange and warped at the intense heat that would rival the core of the sun. As it hit the city, the entire area was engulfed in a glow of orange as the temperature rapidly started to rise. Entire structures twisted and warped as the intense heat made them unable to carry their own weight. The tortured screams of humans could be heard as they burned alive. The water around the city boiled as large quantities turned into steam. The entire city became a puddle of molten metal and concrete, before solidifying after the blast from Prometheus relented. Now where once a great city stood, was nothing more than a giant round slab of concrete, metal and glass, carrying human ashes within it. Elsewhere in another city to the west, massive shadows fell over another city, as 3 talons blocked out the sun. The people were horribly afraid of what this meant. Was it an alien attack? Or was it the Russians? Yes, they actually suspected that Russia had this kind of technology. Suddenly thousands of hatches slid open with a menacing clack. The next thing they knew, thousands upon thousands of small rockets flew out of the massive ships, leaving the same number of beautiful yet menacing dark blue trails behind. As they finally hit the city sporadically, massive amounts of large black blasts rocked the city, engulfing 80% of the city in black, before a moment later the blast had cleared, revealing nothing. Everything that had been inside of those blasts had just disappeared. People screamed in fear of the to them unknown threat. The police station was mostly still intact, and immediately sent out a call for help, but no one answered their calls. In a desperate move, they all armed themselves with SWAT gear in order to try and damage the unknown invaders. Their puny bullets were however vaporized by the shields of the Talons, and before they could realize this, aforementioned ship stopped completely, before a beam came straight down from all 3 of them, and before their eyes a 4 stories tall robot materialized, and before they could overcome their shock a multitude of pods fired out from the Talons, crashing into the ground at high velocities. Shortly after, the doors slid open and an eerie blue glow came from inside, until a mere moment later a large amount of strange creatures came rushing out, hunting down people and destroying buildings. The mantis all spread out relatively quickly, running down the people and decapitating them with practiced ease, slicing up a couple of cars in the process. 50 of the Primera dispersed through the city, sending out their drones once they got to a strategic point. Upon being released, the drones would use their life detection function to scout out the locations of humans in the city, upon which this information would be sent to the other forces. Suddenly hatches located along the outer rim of the Talons slid open without a sound. Shortly after, hundreds of locusts sped out, heading off to the predetermined locations filled with human life, at which point they would unleash their weapons on the cowering humans, effectively wiping out every human the mantis missed. The Atlas was busy unleashing its entire arsenal on the city. Missiles flew out without pause, annihilating many buildings, while the fists destroyed every building that was too close for the missiles to be used. The many turrets fired huge amounts of beams, cutting through the foundation of another building, while the rest of the turrets shot down fleeing humans with utmost accuracy. In a denser part of the city, most of the work was done by the soldiers. Their ability to accurately predict where an enemy is going to be in a second was of utmost importance during ambushes. They were walking into higher buildings, blocking all the exits while a group of soldiers searches the entire building for human life, as well as some of the soldiers, 5 squads of 15, were lying ready on top of buildings and in windows, ready to snipe any person in their sights. The locusts that weren't hunting humans down were circling around the perimeter of the city, destroying all who saw them, leaving the other cities blissfully unaware of their inevitable end. The destruction of the buildings were mostly left to the giant Atlas units. After about an hour of battle, the pods suddenly stopped giving off a reading, meaning that all human life within the city limits had ceased to exist. Immediately all the forces stopped moving in unison, and the large Atlas units moved back towards their landing spot, which was directly beneath the center of their respective Talon battleships. A beam immediately shot out, dematerializing them and storing them in their respective containers as loose particles. All the other forces streamed back into their pods, and with a mighty rumble the pods drew themselves from the ground, flying back into their battleships where all the hatches closed. The locusts suddenly halted their patrol routines, and flew back to the Talons, timing it perfectly so that all the bays were full at the exact same time. The hatches closed and all the rocket pods opened, preparing to release one final volley of missiles. All the pods CED open and tens of thousands of missiles flew towards every last speck of dust left in the city. And when it was over, there was nothing left but an empty spot with roads leading towards it. The Talons just CED their pods shut, brought their shields of, and sped off towards their next destination. After their arrival on the island, Yami left Naruto again. Giving him some time to himself, Naruto jumped of his ship, ordering it to close its glass top and sink beneath the surface, before walking through the city until he entered a small bar called Shaki's Ripoff Bar. Raising one eyebrow at the name of the place, he unsummoned his cloak and shirt, thinking it was better to make a badass entrance than to have to kill everyone that so much as looks at him wrong before stepping in, coming upon a scene that had a talking reindeer with a hat eating cotton candy. Suddenly he heard a small rustle and turned to see a girl with green hair and brown eyes looking at him with a blush on her face. Somehow he felt something strange about her. He walked right up to her, to the confusion of the Straw Hats, and he spoke for the first time since entering. "There's something different about you." All the Straw Hat, Kami and Hakan tensed, but then he poked her right in the forehead, instantly gaining all the information he was looking for getting. "Ah, so you're a mermaid, aren't you?" She could only nod, her eyes wide open in fear. She didn't think that Luffy would be able to save her from this man. This belief was instantly proven to be valid, when Luffy executed a preemptive strike on the young man, upon which the young man just backhanded him with such devastating power that even Luffy lost consciousness for a brief moment, before groggily standing up. Ma, you can relax, I'm not going to take her from you. Is she your?" Their faces darkened before Luffy shouted, "Of course she's our friend." Naruto's face brightened, before a charming smile appeared on his face as he ruffled Kami's hair, gaining him a blush as she pushed her head into his hand. "Good, then I won't have to kill you all. Can't have you abusing this sweet girl now, can I?" Their faces turned confused, while Kami just blushed and looked happy. Hakan let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He sat down at their table and ordered a whiskey. Before noticing that both Shaki and Kami were staring at him with a blush, he snapped his fingers, summoning his shirt and cloak, making everyone's eyes widen to the size of dinner plates, while Luffy went on a rant of how awesome that was, joined by Chopper, who were both asking him excitedly how he did that, being the only ones who completely forgot that he threatened them all with death if Kami was there, something she herself had not forgotten. Naruto decided he liked them. They were weird, yes, but nice. Naruto decided to change the subject. "So you guys pirates?" "Yeah, we are. Why are you a marine?" "TCH, I hold no alliance, I do whatever I wish, so what are you doing here?" "We're looking for an old man so that he can code our ship." "And, why do you need that?" "So that we can sail underwater to Fishman Island." Naruto thought for a moment, before seeming to decide on something. "Let us go find the rest of your crew. You do not need a coding, I will have you ride on my ship, it can travel underwater, I'll even take your ship with me." Luffy and his crew were severely shocked. Moments before this blonde was threatening them, and shortly after he was offering them a ride so they wouldn't need to have their ship coded. The moment of shock lasted several seconds, before Luffy and Chopper's eyes turned into stars. And they began on a rant of how nice he was, causing everyone to sweat drop. Hakan, however, wasn't as easily convinced. "Now wait 1 minute, pretty boy. You just threatened to kill us all if Kami was our. Why are you suddenly offering them a ride?" Naruto glanced at Haken with a slightly darker expression on his face. 3 things. First, don't disrespect me. I will not stand for insults from any being lower than myself, and that include humans and you. Second, I just have great dislike for rapists and RS. You aren't any of the two, so I have no reason to dislike you. Third, I am oh so bored, and I have a feeling that this will entertain me. Now come Mr. Pirate. Lead me to your crew. Naruto unsummoned his shirt and cloak, deciding that he didn't really need them at the moment, and they set off to find Nami, Robin, Zoro, and the ship where the rest was present. It took them about 3 hours to find the first 3, and they were walking through the streets as 3 weird guys with helmets on their faces were walking towards them, while everyone around them was bowing their heads down. Haken pushed the heads of the straw hats down before yelling at Naruto to bow down. Naruto, however, ignored him and remained standing tall, giving the guys with the helmets a look that screamed, "Don't with me, I can kill you in the time it takes you to blink." The Tenryubito ignored that, however, and screamed at Naruto while aiming his gun at him, firing again and again, repeatedly hitting the blonde boy in the head, although he was holding his gaze while ignoring the insignificant wounds inflicted on him. He could finally make out the screams of the helmeted men. "Bow down, you lowly scum. I'm a Tenryubito, I founded the world." Naruto suddenly sprouted 3 pairs of wings, and a halo shone upon his head, his belt buckle with the kanji for God shining a bright white. As he spoke, his voice sounding so powerful and ethereal that everyone stood motionless. "Bow down. To you, lowly mortal. How dare you command me to bow down to you? Die, you insignificant mortal?" He raised one hand and a beam of light shot out of it, causing the Tenryubito's head to be vaporized in the blast. While he closed his other hand, the earth around their guards shooting up and crushing them. The skies then grew dark, like it was the middle of the night, but even darker. Naruto raised both his hands, and out of a rip in time-space, an ethereal figure, holding a dagger in his mouth, appeared. It stopped, looking at Naruto with what everyone assumed was a questioning glance. "Shinigami-kun, would you be so kind as to reap the souls of these fools?" They thought they could make me bow down to them. Shinigami looked at the mortals with a disbelieving glance, before taking his knife out of his mouth, and reforming it as a giant scythe, chuckling as he stared the mortals down. "I'll be glad to. Mortals need to know their place before us, right? By the way, congratulations on your ascension." He swept his scythe down, watching as the Tenryubito began screaming as their souls were pulled out, before he opened another rift and disappeared. Leaving them crumpled on the ground, their eyes open in shock, but lacking any life. At his command, the skies turned blue again, as if nothing ever happened. He turned around to face the Straw Hat once more, seeing Zoro and Brook staring at him in slight fear, Nami, Robin and Kami slightly drooling with massive blushes on their cheeks, and Luffy and Chopper with stars in their eyes as they yelled how awesome that was. He walked up to Nami and Robin and hooked one arm around Nami's and one around Robin's waists, pulling them close. They sighed in happiness and leaned into him, forgetting completely that they actually just met him, just happy that he was holding them close. With his arms still around them, they started walking to the docks, completely ignoring the frantic cries of a marine that 3 of the Tenryubito had just been killed, calling for an admiral to take care of things. As they neared the docks, they noticed that a small fleet of battleships was approaching the archipelago. The other crewmates were a bit distrusting at first, especially after noticing the way Nami and Robin were acting around him, like they were madly in love with him, not caring that he was holding them both at the same time. But they relented after hearing that Naruto killed 3 of the Tenryubito, obviously dismissing the thought that he was actually a marine. After Luffy asked him where his ship was, a giant egg-shaped white ship came out of the water right next to them. To the amazement of Frankie, the top of the hull simply disappeared, and a hatch in the hull opened, allowing their ship to enter. After they all got off their ship, the hatch closed and they were allowed to go on board. After they were all done with gawking at the wonders of the ship, they were having a conversation in the lounge. Naruto was sitting on the lounge chair with Nami and Robin against him. He was caressing their bellies, causing them to occasionally stifle a low. They were enjoying themselves, which was apparent by their blushes and the fact that they were resting their heads on Naruto's shoulders. When suddenly Naruto asked a question. "Excuse me for prying, but I sense something different about Luffy, Chopper, Brook and Miss Robin here. Care to tell me what it is?" He finished, squeezing Robin's side affectionately, before continuing with one last revelation. "Frankie, something is off about you two, but it feels different than with the first 4. After a moment of thought, they decided to tell Naruto what was hardly a secret anyway. Robin sprouted arms from all over Naruto, seductively caressing his chest and abdomen. Chopper grew into a large gorilla-like creature. Luffy stretched his face out. Brook muttered about how he had died before, and Frankie opened up his stomach to reveal his cola reservoirs. Seeing Naruto looked confused, Robin decided to explain it to him, but not before letting out a seductive giggle. You see, Naruto-kun, Copper, Brook, Luffy and myself have devil fruits, and Frankie is a cyborg. Naruto's eyes widened ever so slightly, before a smile appeared on his face. He had indeed chosen an interesting bunch of humans. Really, tell me about these devil fruits. Well, a devil fruit is a special fruit that grants the person who eats it special powers. They can change the substance your body is made from, give you the ability to transform into something, or give you control over an element. However, in gaining these abilities you also lose the ability to swim. In fact, you become unable to move in the water. Naruto frowned. That was a problem. If they found his crystal by chance, the ship would vaporize and they would all drown. He'd have to eliminate that weakness in Robin at least. He liked her, and she was hot. Suddenly Sanji came back with a dinner. The moment he spotted me cuddling with Nami and Robin, he went apeshit crazy and attacked me, causing Nami and Robin to tense, even though I wasn't in any real danger. Get your hands of my Nami San and my Robin Schwan. He flew towards Naruto at a high speed before stopping suddenly as he came into contact with a barrier just before hitting Naruto. He then bounced off, clutching his leg in pain as the barrier had not even given an inch. Naruto chuckled merrily before his face turned serious, and he stood up, summoning his cloak and shirt, to the obvious displeasure of the two ladies he had been cuddling with. All of you follow me, I have to show you something. They all followed him, although they were confused at his sudden change in demeanor. They walked through the halls of the palace for a while before they came to a dead end, when Naruto suddenly spoke. Talon, open the crystal hatch. As soon as he finished, a robotic voice creaked through the entire ship. Hi. Naruto-sama. And then the wall in front of them slid open quickly. Not a sound was made as the previous wall seemed to meld completely into the ceiling. Frankie was especially amazed by this, as he was the mechanic of the bunch. They then followed Naruto down a long twisting hallway, before they finally came into a large room that continued into the depths, and extended at least 4 stories higher. In the middle of the room was a large cyan crystal, which glowed with a power none of them could understand. It filled most of the giant room, leaving them to wonder what a pure crystal that size was worth. After another minute of them gazing in wonder at the large crystal, Naruto finally spoke. This is the power crystal. None of you must ever touch it or attempt to remove it from this chamber. This ship is designed and developed solely by me. Therefore only I can touch this crystal. This is because if any mortal touches this crystal, the entire ship will instantly disappear along with the crystal, leaving you all to fall into the waters below. I designed it this way so that no one can steal my technology, which is obviously superior to anything pirates or marines may have. Now the reason I'm showing you this is that all 4 of you cannot swim, and as such if my ship disappears you will all drown. Now I've decided I like you guys and I don't want that to happen, especially not to Robin-chan. Do you understand? They all looked slightly unnerved but nodded. Upon a loud explosion was suddenly heard just outside the ship. Turning back, running instead of walking, they hurried out of the corridor, the door closing behind them as they left the secret walkway. Where they saw a guy in a striped yellow-orange suit with rockstar glassed firing lasers at the ship, which were deflected by the barrier shield. Robin's eyes widened in horror. It was Admiral Kizaru. She had finally found someone she thought she could love, and now they were all going to die. He was said to be strongest of the admirals. Naruto stared passively at the admiral. He was going to have some fun with him. He commanded his ship in a firm tone. Talon, I'm going to have some fun with this admiral guy. As soon as I'm gone, activate the full reflector shields and only open them for me, and close the glass hull please. The robotic voice sounded again. As you wish, Naruto-sama. Nami and Robin gasped in horror as they heard Naruto say that. Was he going to fight an admiral? What if he died? What would they do? They were however shaken out of their reverie as Naruto ed them both on the cheeks, causing them to gasp and blush. Bye ladies. Root for me, okay? Was all he said before he floated off the ship, while the 2 ladies could only utter muffled affirmatives. As soon as Naruto was 10 feet from the ship, an energy field sprung up and the glass hull materialized, leaving them protected as Naruto battled with the admiral.
As soon as Naruto hit the ground, the Admiral was right in front of him, staring him down before speaking.
"Ooh, are you the one who attacked the Tenryubito?" Naruto looked at him with confusion on his face. It was evident that he didn't know what a Tenryubito was. "I don't know what a Tenryubito is, but if you mean the guys with the helmets on their heads, then yes, I killed them. Those pathetic mortals were telling me that they were superior to me while they haven't done a single thing in their life but rape and as such have lost all their right to live." The Admiral just kept a blank look on his face, and after a long while of silence he finally spoke, twisting his face in a weird expression as he did. "I see, I'm afraid I'm going to have to kill you then. May I have your name? You're not a registered pirate, are you?" "I'm Uzumaki Naruto, but you're not going to be able to kill me, Mr. Lightman." Kizaru suddenly appeared behind Naruto, before kicking him at light speed. Imagine his surprise when his leg was stopped by a hand, before being chopped off at the base by what looked like a dark red energy blade. Of course it wasn't lasting damage, but it was faster than he could react, and that's saying something for a guy that can go at light speed. Kizaru quickly reformed his leg from light particles but was once again surprised as Naruto held up his hand and a red thunderbolt flew out of it, nearly hitting Kizaru as a thunderbolt moves as fast as light. Naruto then summoned a jetpack in his hat. Looking cool while fighting is essential. He used his vastly enhanced jetpack to be at Kizaru's side in less than a second, before chopping him in half with an energy blade. Which looked quite cool, but otherwise it didn't really do anything since Kizaru could just reform his body, although that took a little time. Kizaru then quickly appeared behind Naruto, before shooting a laser at him, which he ducked under and gave Kizaru an elbow to the gut. Kizaru didn't expect that and it actually hurt a bit before his body dissolved into light, reappearing a little away from Naruto. He then lifted one leg to unleash his leg laser beam of death, but he never finished as Naruto gestured with one arm towards him and instantly from thin air in front of Naruto, over 40 black tendrils with arrowheads appeared and shot towards Kizaru, impaling him in several different places, including heart, brain, lungs and every other major veins, as well as piercing all the major joints at once, which once again proved to be useless as it only served to stop Kizaru from attacking. Kizaru suddenly reappeared behind Naruto and finally managed to land a kick on the young god, feeling even more shocked as his kick simply went through the young mon's head, so shocked that he forgot to activate his powers when the blonde backhanded him savagely across the face, sending him flying into a building 100 feet away. The Straw Hat couldn't believe their eyes. Not only was this blonde battling evenly with an admiral, he's doing it without receiving any damaging blows, just stopping his attacks like they were attacks from a little boy before landing his own strikes. But what was even more surprising was his combat efficiency. He didn't just strike his enemy in a random spot that he could reach. Every attack would be at the very least a debilitating blow and in any other case instantly lethal. If his opponent didn't have a Logia-type devil fruit, the Admiral would have been dead after the first strike. The Admiral, however, was not one to be crossed lightly either. His frightening attack speed and his very destructive blows would grind any lesser opponent to dust in mere seconds. His evasion was nothing to be mocked as he literally dissolved every time anything hit him. Naruto tensed as he felt the Admiral approach at incredible speeds. He was right, this fight would be fun after all. He hadn't had a challenge in ages. Kizaru appeared in front of Naruto again. This time lifting his finger and firing several lasers, which were avoided before Naruto landed a palm strike to his heart infused with Yuki. The Yuki influenced the light particles and as a result it took longer for Kizaru to reform, and even though no damage was apparent, Kizaru had a pained expression on his face. Naruto figured that he corrupted the light, and therefore it had to be cleansed before Kizaru could reform, which apparently hurt. He grinned maliciously, which sent shivers up Kizaru's spine, before he darted off at a high speed, slamming his fist into Kizaru, who immediately dissolved into light. But right at that moment he released a huge blast of Yuki, completely corrupting the light particles, and making Kizaru go through a large amount of pain when he finally reformed. His reforming actually cost 30 seconds this time, and he looked really confused and in pain at the same time. Naruto almost wanted to laugh at his expression, but decided not to, since anger might make the fight less fun for him. Darting forward he immediately went for a clothesline, but he was evaded and got hit by Kizaru in the back of the neck. The strike would have beheaded him, but Naruto made it pass through him without inflicting any damage. Naruto then turned around and decided to mess with Kizaru's head, so he held up one finger and started firing laser beams at the Admiral. It worked like a charm. because as soon as he did Kizaru froze in place. It was not shocking enough to keep him from dissolving into light wherever the beams hit, but he didn't move at all and he had a shocked expression on his face. Naruto committed it to his memory so he could make a picture of it later. Kizaru could not believe it. How could this young man copy his powers? Now that he thought about it, the kid had been doing a lot of weird things. He could shoot lightning bolts, stop his lightspeed kick with one hand, form a blade in midair, create black arrow thingies. He could even cause him pain when he reformed. Nobody had ever been able to do that. And now he just copies his laser beams. If the guy lived through the fight, he'd really have to talk to Sengoku about this one. Tell me, boy, why are you a pirate? You don't look like such a bad guy. Naruto stopped firing laser beams and snapped his fingers, causing his hat, shirt and cloak to appear, shocking the Marine Admiral once again. All those powers and more. Damn, the kid was quite unbeatable as it was, but now it didn't seem like he had a chance. I'm not a pirate, Mr. Lightman. Then why are you helping those pirates escape from the government? Well, two reasons actually. One, they're my kind of people. They're against rape and rye. They don't kill people without reason and they seem to have honor. They're decent people if you get past the childhood dream of becoming king of the pirates their captain has. They're part of the admittedly small amount of decent humans alive. I don't want to have them get killed just because you people see anyone calling themselves pirates evil. The world is not black and white. Almost anything is a shade of gray. The second reason is the two girls in the crew. They're smokin' hot. They're into me. I'm into them. I haven't had any for 2 weeks. Well, yeah. Kizaru had to admit, the boy had a point. Well, the first point anyway, but as a man he couldn't really disagree with the second reason either. They were quite attractive. But nonetheless, no matter how much sense this boy's belief is, he was still a Marine, and he still had a job to do. Kizaru sighed. He really didn't want to do this, but if he didn't, the Sengoku would have his head for allowing the man that killed 3 of the Tenryubito to escape. You have a good point, kid, I'll give you that, but if I don't kill you my boss'll have my head, so I guess we'll have to fight again. Naruto already decided that he had had his fun for today. It was time to finish this. I'm sorry, man, but I've got to finish this before more of your lackeys arrive. I won't kill you though. I have a feeling we'll meet again. Naruto quickly used his powers to completely shut off Kizaru's access to his devil fruit, and before he could register it, Naruto was already upon him, firing 3 small laser beams. One went through his shoulder, another went through his lung, and the final one went through his ankle. Dr. Vegapunk would be able to heal it, but it effectively put him out of the fight. Kizaru was at a loss for words. 1 second this kid tells him that he has to finish the fight and the next he can't use his devil fruit anymore. And within 3 seconds he was simply destroyed by the kid, and he had the idea that the kid could have easily done worse. Oh yeah, he was definitely going to have to talk to Sengoku about this one. Naruto floated back to the ship, and the hull and shield opened for him, allowing him to safely land on the boat, after which the Straw Hat were immediately upon him. Luffy and Chopper were saying how awesome he was, Zoro and Sanji were looking at him with respect, Usopp was looking at him in awe, Brook was telling skull jokes, Frankie was ranting about Suppa, and Nami and Robin were at his side in a blink as he wrapped his arms around their waists. Nami was half-heartedly yelling at him while Robin was just happy to be close to him. After they had all calmed down, Naruto decided that it was time to get underway. He was quite interested in this Fishman Island. An island underwater where humans can walk around was unique to say the least. It was something he just had to see. So guys, what say we go to Fishman Island? I mean, I want to spend time with you, so we're not going to go fast, but I think it's best we leave before more Marines come and attack us. Nami-chan, could you point me in the general direction of Fishman Island? Nami took a look at the log pose, before nodding and saying, it's to the diagonally left and forward of the ship, and the downwards at a 65-degree angle, Naruto-kun. Naruto nodded to her before saying, Talon, did you hear that? Yes, Naruto-sama, I heard. All right, detect a concentration of intelligent life in that direction. It has been found, Naruto-sama. Then set a course towards the coordinates at a leisurely pace and warn me when ETA is less than 1 hour. Hi. Instantly the ship started to move, although no sounds of the engine could be heard. And since they weren't standing inside, they could see the water starting to rise at the edge of the hull. It was a weird experience for the Straw Hat. They felt like they were standing in a sinking ship. As the water rose to the top, Nami and Robin covertly grabbed Naruto closer, out of slight fear of what would happen if this wasn't actually supposed to happen. After a few minutes the boat was entirely underwater, Frankie was the first to speak. Naruto Aniki, how is it that the engine doesn't make a sound, yet we still move? Naruto looked at him with a slight smile on his face, glad that someone was showing interest in how things worked. That's because it's a special engine. I call it a cold fusion engine. It is based on the principle that if we compress the two of the smallest building blocks of all matter called atoms together under a very high temperature, that they will fuse together and create one atom, releasing a huge amount of energy in the process. The energy is then led through a filter that will instantly cool down the energy to a temperature just above 0 degrees Celsius, which is then used to power turbines, eliminating the need for noisy cooling machines. The beauty of it is that once the process has started it will not end until no matter is left to fuse, and since my power crystal can create matter from nothing as long as I power it, it makes for the perfect way to move quickly and silently, since no stops are ever needed to replenish fuel. Frankie was marveling at the prospect of such an engine, but also slightly sad since he couldn't add it to the Thousand Sunny, but Naruto wasn't finished talking yet. The cool part is that this ship can go much faster than this. It can go at 9 times the speed of sound, but I won't do that since your bodies can't handle it, and except for Luffy you'd probably all die. Oh, and my ship can fly, since it's just that awesome. But again, unless I make a ship especially for you, you can't really recreate my technology, since without the power crystal that only I know how to make, none of this would work. Now Frankie was drooling. A ship that could fly and go super fast? The possibilities and practical applications that could have was astounding. Now Frankie understood why Naruto had designed his technology so that no one could ever steal it. If the Marines ever got a hold of that kind of technology, they would annihilate the pirates within weeks. It would tip the entire power balance in favor of its owner. But that also means that combined with the frightening level of skill he has displayed in battle so far, that if they make him angry there is no doubt they would die. He supposed it was actually lucky that Nami and Robin had taken a liking to him very quickly, and that he seemed to have the hots for them too. According to Luffy, however, they didn't have much to be afraid of. Naruto had stated that he really only disliked rapists and RS, and from his actions they had ascertained that he also didn't like it when people demanded things from him. Then Naruto spoke again. Anyway guys, I'm going to go to the onsen. Anyone want to join me? And ladies, it's a mixed gender since I'm really the only person on this ship, so you might want to go get a bikini or something if you decide to go. Robin, Luffy, Chopper and Brook declined since they were devil fruit users. Although Robin seemed reluctant to decline, she wanted to spend some time with Naruto. Usopp wanted to go look at the fish outside, so he declined as well. Zoro wasn't interested, he wanted to sleep instead. Sanji declined since he wanted to get started on dinner, and Frankie wanted to go look around the ship. Nami, seeing her chance to be alone with Naruto in an onsen, agreed to come, secretly pleasing Naruto greatly. Naruto snapped his fingers and was suddenly in his swimming boxers, and after showing Nami the onsen he proceeded to go in and relax himself. No matter how powerful you are, it's still nice to relax after a long day. The hot water caressed his skin as he slowly descended into the perfectly warm water, relishing in the feeling of his muscles unwinding from all today's excitement. He had traveled to a new world, met some interesting people, killed someone important, fought Mr. Lightman, and invited previously mentioned people onto his boat for a ride to Fishman Island. He had to admit that even though he loved his new life as a god, sometimes his exciting life tired him. Not that he's complaining though. Why would anyone complain that they have become a god? As the steam rose it made it quite difficult for him to see anything, and because it didn't really bother him he left it that way. It really wasn't a surprise to him when suddenly 2 soft arms wrapped around him and a young supply body was pressed against his own. And a sudden husky voice broke the silence. "Hello Naruto-kun." He replied with an affectionate greeting before he wrapped his own arms around her, putting a bit more pressure on it so that she was pulled closer to him, chuckling lightly as she ate a bit from the closeness of their bodies. He softly raked one hand through her hair, relishing in its smooth softness as Nami simply lay against him and enjoyed the simple but pleasurable action. After she had gotten used to this, however, she wanted more pleasure. She had finally found a guy she liked as more than a friend, and even though she knew that Robin would think the same way and that he would not stop her, for some reason she didn't seem to mind, as the feeling in the pit of her stomach told her to just go for it, and to finally make a shot at a measure of true love. As the silence grew deafening, she spread her legs a bit, allowing herself to straddle him slightly, even though they were still sitting up. As he looked at her with a questioning glance, she took her chance. She neared her face to his and then she placed a light, but passionate on his lips. Her mind was running at 1,000 miles an hour as the touch from his lips seemed akin to that of pure electricity. The pleasure of such electricity was making her feel all weak even when the itself was akin to a peck on the lips. Naruto then reacted, tilting his head to deepen and as she gasped from the increase in pleasure he slipped his tongue into her mouth, while using one hand on the back of her head to pull her closer, and the other to slowly but firmly massage her ass. The reaction he got was immediate as she let out aloud into his mouth. Large surges of electricity were racking her nerve system as she had never had such a passionate before, the warmth from the onsen making it impossible for her body to release its added heat causing her to feel all hot inside. Her tongue darted around his in a dance of passion. She brought one of her hands up to his face weakly as her body was too focused on receiving more pleasure to actually think. After a while of passionate ing they broke away, Nami sitting peacefully in Naruto's lap. Both just relaxing in the steaming water of the onsen. Suddenly, Naruto broke the silence. Nami-chan, if you could wish for any one thing, what would you wish for? Nami put her finger on her chin in thought, and after a while she finally spoke, her face having turned a bit sad from unpleasant memories. If I could wish for anything, it would be that my mother, Belmere-san, would be alive again. Naruto closed his eyes in concentration, and after short time he finally managed to contact her through a telepathic connection. Kami-chan, do you have a person named Belmere under your wing? I wish to bring her back. It was silent for a while but after about a minute he finally got a response. Yes I do Naruto-kun, but I can. Allow you to take her to the world of the living. She made a pact with me to serve me in death if her daughter's lives were guaranteed to not end untimely. I can allow you to borrow her for an hour though. Thanks Kami-chan. Naruto looked at Nami who was giving Hai a questioning look at his long silence, before he told her. Well Nami-chan I'm sorry but I can't bring your mother back to life. I can allow you to meet her for an hour though. Nami's eyes widened in disbelief and hope. How could he possibly do that? Her face turned slightly teary as she answered. Really Naruto-kun? Yes. And after he spoke that word his eyes closed in concentration, the air becoming heavy with a divine power as he concentrated on calling forth Belmere's soul. In a sudden flash of light a body materialized, complete with bikini as it fell into the onsen. About 10 seconds later it popped out of the water, revealing the happy face of Belmere. Nami's face instantly cleared up as she saw that he actually did it. In tears she hugged her late mother tightly, which was happily returned. She could just hear Naruto say in a soft voice. Belmere, Nami-chan, you've got 1 hour before Belmere needs to return to Kami. Enjoy your time, I'll leave you two alone. Naruto left the onsen with a smile on his face, changing with a snap of his fingers. He walked through the bright hallways of his palace towards Robin's room. Knocking on the door softly, he was surprised when Robin opened the door in a white nightgown that clung to her body, showing off her sensual curves. She had a book in one hand, that was dropped as soon as she saw who it was at her door this evening. A heavy blush decorating her face, highlighting her slim cheeks quite nicely. Naruto-kun, what are you doing here? How was the onsen? Naruto just smiled a heartbreaker smile, making her stomach flutter as her face became flushed. Robin-chan. The onsen was quite nice actually. You know? I knew that nobody but Nami and me would go to the onsen. Robin's face grew sad and a single tear escaped from her eyes no matter how much she tried to hold it back. Didn't he want her just as much as he wanted Nami? Maybe he decided that he didn't really like her silent demeanor and thus chose to abandon her altogether even though she would have been content with sharing. She finally spoke, her tone betraying her sadness as her voice wavered slightly from unshed tears. Then why Naruto-kun? Why would you propose it if you knew I couldn't come? Did you decide that you didn't want me? Did you decide you desired only Nami and not me? Why? He smiled lovingly at her, making her sad like this was a terrible feeling for him, but she would only be happier if she realized what she thought was wrong. So he just kept his warm smile on his face as he responded to her once more. I wanted some alone time. Just as she was about to slam the door shut and burst out in tears he stepped closer to her, closing the door behind him as he wrapped his arms around her tightly, before bringing his mouth to her ear and whispering softly into it. With both of you. Robin-chan. Could you really be so foolish that you could even think that I would not desire you? I actually feel a bit offended that you would think that I could be so blind as to not even notice you. I simply gave Nami a gift that I'm sure she would enjoy better if we let her completely alone. She'll be really happy tomorrow, you'll see. And I hope that if you allow me, that you'll be happy tomorrow as well." Robin's sad frown instantly turned into a grin at his words. She felt as if a 1,000-pound weight had just been lifted from her shoulders. She sighed contentedly as she leaned into his embrace, his intoxicating warmth spreading freely through her body, filling her every fiber and sending her into a happy daze. Just happy that he desired her, and just happy to be there in his arms. She was pulled roughly out of her reverie when he lifted her up, gently laying her upon her bed, before he lay down next to her, never once releasing her from his arms. He then pulled her closer, and planted his lips on hers, sending a huge shock of electricity through her, causing her to let out a delighted which was muffled by his mouth. He slipped his tongue into her mouth, and for the second time that night he ensued in an epic battle of love, which eventually left Robin drooling and unable to think clearly as it ended. And before long, Naruto asked her the same question he asked Nami. "Robin-chan, if you could wish for any one thing, what would it be?" Robin didn't even have to think, she just looked him straight in the eye, fighting against her need to him again, struggling to answer his question normally. "Naruto-kun, I want to learn about the blank century, the time of which no history is known, that is my dream." Naruto was silent for a good long while, contemplating on what to do. He could of course let her see the blank century, but then he would be taking her dream away. After the excitement of knowing everything had waned, what would she do with the rest of her life? He finally decided that he would wait a while before deciding if he would fulfill her dream for her, and spoke to her. "I'm sorry Robin-chan, but I will not grant you that wish. I cannot just accomplish your dream for you here and now. I am much too afraid that you would lose your sense of purpose and after the excitement wears off, that you would be unhappy. I will however grant you a gift. Something unique in this world." She was slightly sad, but he did raise a good point. On second thought, she didn't really want someone to just hand her the answer. Maybe if she really couldn't figure it out, but not know, what would she do afterwards? She couldn't really think of anything solid to do with her life after she had accomplished her dream. But she wondered what she was going to get. And just like any other girl would she turn instantly giddy. "And what is that, Naruto-kun?" He smiled at her, happy that she took it well. He really didn't want her to be sad, but he just didn't want to make her insanely happy for a week, if it ruins the rest of her life. "I'm going to remove the weakness of your devil fruit. I'm going to give you the chance to swim again, then we could go to the onsen together. And you will always have the element of surprise since no one will suspect that you can swim." She couldn't believe he could do that, but suddenly she got a weird bubbly feeling inside of her, and in a flash she was in a tank with water up to her neck. She panicked, thinking she is going to drown, but she could actually stand. She couldn't believe it, he had actually done it. He had successfully removed the weakness of the devil fruit without even having to do a single scientific test. She was truly amazed, and thankful to him for what he had done for her, the one person the whole world hated. After she was out of the tank and dried off, she just smiled at him and eyed him deeply, hoping that would somehow convey how thankful she felt right now. After he was done cuddling with Robin, he sneaked into Zoro's room, setting a trap for him, making sure that he was awakened rather rudely, before he sneaked out of his room. Closing the door softly behind him, he walked through the halls towards his master bedroom. Lying down under the sheets, he relished in the softness of the bed as he slowly drifted off to sleep. As Zoro woke up in the morning, he found something tickling his face. With an annoyed look on his face, his eyes still closed, he lifted up his hand to grab it. It seemed to be some kind of rope dangling in his face. He quickly pulled it away when he heard something move, and suddenly, splash! Zoro was entirely soaked and vowed to find the one person that was responsible for this blasphemy. He stormed out of the room, only to find Naruto and the entire crew waiting for him. After Zoro had woken up, Naruto gathered the entire Straw Hat crew in the dining hall and made an announcement. "Everyone, I have decided I like you guys, so I'll give you each something for 2 reasons. 1, I like you, I don't want you guys to die. 2, to be able to protect Nami and Robin if necessary, because if you let either of them die, I'll come and kill y'all." They all looked excited. You could feel the wonders of what they would get flowing of them in waves. Naruto walked up to the reindeer man, holding a bottle of 250 milliliters in his hands. "Chopper, as the doctor of this crew, I depend on you to keep them all healthy, and because of that I have given you a medicine that will cure any disease instantly with only 1 drop. The doctor's jaw dropped into the deck, and he accepted the bottle with stars in his eyes, while saying that he wasn't happy and that they were all idiots. After smiling at the young reindeer, Naruto walked up to Brook. I think I will do everyone a favor by giving you your flesh back.
And before their eyes, organs started growing. His head was enveloped by skin as his eyes and nose regrew. His torso wasn't entirely skinned by now, and the rest of the flesh was quickly regaining its normal color. After a minute had passed, Brook was standing in his full alive glory, causing the entire Straw Hat crew to drop their jaws into the ground in amazement, before Brook started crying in happiness, and began trying to hug Naruto in his state, which caused Naruto to hit him over the head.
After the small break, Naruto walked up to Zoro, and took his swords in his hands. The swords glowed white for a moment before they returned to their normal color. Only a black swirl had appeared on their hilts. Naruto gave Zoro the swords back and told him what he did. I have blessed your swords, now they can cut through almost everything, and they will feel like they are a part of your body. Zoro nodded in thanks, a slight smile on his face as he watched Naruto move on to the next person. Sanji watched in anticipation as he wondered what he would get. As the cook of this ship, I am counting on you to feed everyone food with enough nutrients to keep them healthy, but you are also one of the main fighters, therefore you get 2 gifts. I will bless your legs so that you can run faster, and kick way harder than you were able to before. And I will give you a tome with all the recipes that I know. There's over 3,000 recipes in there, as well as new cooking techniques. Naruto nodded and Sanji's legs suddenly grew stronger. They glowed a bright white until a moment later Sanji felt it way easier to stand. It was like he weighed nothing. Another nod later, a book the size of several encyclopedias put together appeared in Sanji's hands. Naruto walked towards Luffy next, who had stars in his eyes at all the cool gifts they got. Naruto lifted up his arm and a black energy blade popped out. Then the blade disappeared and a beautiful golden bracelet appeared in his hands, which he then gave to Luffy. Because you're the captain, you will also get 2 gifts. One is this bracelet, which can call out an energy blade like the ones I use. Second is I will access another dormant ability you have, and give you the knowledge on how to control it. It is called Haki. Naruto then poked Luffy in the forehead, instantly accessing his ability and learning him how to control it. Luffy then flashed his bright smile and thanked Naruto exuberantly. Naruto then walked up to Usopp, who was literally trembling at what he would receive. Naruto held both his hands up and formed a sniper rifle in it. As the sharpshooter of the crew, I think this would be a most fitting gift for you. This is called a sniper rifle. It holds an unlimited amount of bullets that can shoot through a marine battleship, and if you can correct for bullet weight, distance, and wind, you can shoot someone from several miles away with it. You simply look through the scope on top and aim it at the enemy's head, then you pull the trigger and bam! Dead. Usopp nodded enthusiastically in thanks. He couldn't wait to try the sniper rifle out on some marines. They thought he could shoot far before? Huh. This baby can shoot 20 times as far as his Kabuto. Naruto walked up to Frankie and said, and last but certainly not least, Frankie, I will give you a chance I will never give anyone again, but you must swear on your honor as a mechanic that you will no tinker with it or try to reverse engineer it. Can you promise me that? Frankie thought about it for a little while before he nodded, all traces of his normal exuberant attitude completely gone as he swore an oath. Naruto then gave him a warm smile. All right then, I will give you some of my technology. I will give you one of the weapons I designed myself. It is basically a laser that shoots a solid ray of white light that can cut through anything at a distance. Think of it as a bullet that always goes right through the target regardless of armor and may even go through the targets behind the target. If you use it with this special prism I included, the beam will split into several smaller beams, essentially making it a long-range version of the shotgun. Frankie's left arm glowed white and a new compartment was added. Frankie looked like he was in ecstasy at the mere mention of that level of technology, but nodded anyway and said his thanks. At that moment a sudden alarm was heard and the robotic voice of the Talon rang through the entire ship. Naruto-sama, we're under attack. The Marines have coded ships that are launching some kind of missiles at us. They seem to be propelling themselves in the water using some primitive version of a turbine. Naruto thought for a second, trying to decide on the way he could have the most fun with this situations. Talon, how many ships are there? There are at present 10 ships after us, Naruto-sama. Alright then, I have modified 10 mantis to be able to fight underwater, send them out. Hi. Naruto-sama. The Straw Hat watched in awe as a hatch to the side of the ship opened and 10 white figures shaped like a praying mantis shot out, darting out towards the ship. their energy blades glowing dangerously in the dark of the deep sea. They watched on in horror as all the mantis did was slice open the bubble coating of the marine ship, immediately negating the entire coating, and crushing the marines along with their ships, to oblivion due to the water pressure. The mantis shot back into the ship, and within 2 minutes of the start of the confrontation, everything was at peace again, the attack having been shrugged off like it was a toddler attacking a giant tank. Being inside of a ship that powerful made them feel at ease even when they were 3,000 miles under the surface. Alright, what did y'all think? I actually wanted to get the entire One Piece arc done in one chapter, but I have a feeling if I get more hits if I just upload slightly smaller chapters regularly. After Naruto woke up again, Robin refused to let anyone wake him up. They all had breakfast. As usual, it was a chaos for everyone but 3 of the people present. One was Naruto because he would brutally mutilate anyone who touched his food, the other 2 were Robin and Nami, because now there were 2 people who would beat on the offender. Naruto materialized the paper in his hands and skimmed through the articles for something interesting, and when he found one he felt compelled to share it with the Straw Hats. Hey guys, there's apparently going to be some kind of pirate war between Whitebeard and the world government. Everyone was interested in that, so they all stopped eating and listened to what he had to say. Apparently the Marines caught some guy named Portgas d'Ace and they're going to execute him in 2 days at Marineford, and Whitebeard is guaranteed to try and stop them from doing so. It's guaranteed to be quite an event to behold. As the name Portgas d'Ace was spoken, the room turned deathly quiet. The expressions of Luffy, Usopp, Chopper and Nami were ones of horror. Sanji and Zoro looked shocked. Naruto looked up from the paper at the eerie silence filling the room. Something wrong? He asked them, as he was pretty confused over the extreme reaction to the article. Luffy, as energetic as ever, shouted, his face contorted in anger at the thought of the Marines killing Ace. Ace is my older brother, we have to go save him. Naruto just gave him a blank stare before he raised one eyebrow. And is this brother of yours a rapist or are? Luffy shook his head and Nami pleaded with Naruto. Please Naruto-kun, you have to help us save Ace. Well, I don't know. But, if he's a good person he should be saved, and I do kinda want to see this battle. And maybe I'll meet someone interesting, plus Nami-chan asked. Alright, I guess I'll help you. They cheered and Naruto decided on a course of action. Talon, do you remember the chakra signature of Mr. Lightman? Yes I do, Naruto-sama. Alright, we rise from the water in 30 minutes, and we set off towards Mr. Lightman's chakra signature through the skies at an altitude of 12 kilometers, and we will move at 1,200 kilometers per hour. Hi. Suddenly the ship stopped moving, which caused everyone to jump slightly, before the ship started moving towards the surface at a frightening pace, causing them all to feel like they were being pressed against the floor by an elephant. After a while though they got used to it and they watched as the water grew brighter and brighter as they neared the surface. Suddenly they shot from the water and the Straw Hat gasped as they ran towards the edge of the ship. Their faces set in childish wonder as the ship rose higher and higher, until they were about as high as Skypia. Then Naruto told them to hold on to something, and as they did Naruto gave the okay for the next action. Suddenly a high-pitched noise could be heard and it got higher and higher until it suddenly stopped. Then the turbines started turning and were soon turning at about 1/9 of their max speed. Naruto then turned back to the breakfast table and resumed his breakfast as they were underway towards Marineford. He had a great time since everyone, even Luffy, was too busy gawking at the height, speed and scenery to even think about food. After breakfast Naruto acted like he was napping in Robin's lap again, while actually just savoring the warmth and planning out his acts for when he finally chose to deal with Konoha and the elemental countries. Oh yeah, he had a lot to do. At Marineford, Sengoku's office, Kizaru walked into the office, and waited for Sengoku to notice him, which took very long. After 10 minutes he sweat dropped and coughed, startling Sengoku as he had no idea anybody was there. When he saw Kizaru looking official he was confused. Kizaru wasn't a person to formally report on anything. Sengoku supposed that the incident on Shibandi had shaken the Admiral more than he had realized. It wasn't every day that 3 of the Tenryubito were killed and that an Admiral wasn't fast enough to capture the offenders. Especially Kizaru, he had always been the fastest person alive. No one had ever escaped his grasp. Thinking that it was best to let the Admiral get his feelings of his chest, he motioned for Kizaru to speak, and after a moment of hesitation he did. Sengoku, there is something you need to know. At Shibandi Archipelago, I wasn't too slow to catch the perpetrator. Sengoku's eyes widened. What could this mean? Did it mean that Kizaru was beaten? Was he outsmarted or did he let them go? After calming himself he waited for Kizaru to continue, which he soon did. I was beaten, Sengoku. This kid, Uzumaki Naruto, incapacitated me without me landing a single blow on him. He could even catch my lightspeed kick. Sengoku's eyes widened further as he dropped the pen he was holding in shock. How could some unknown person who had never even been seen before beat one of the three admirals with apparent ease? It just wasn't possible. What kind of ability must he have for that to happen? What? He cried in outrage. How could that happen? What kind of ability does he have for that to be possible? Kizaru frowned and explained. Well, that's just the problem. He seems to have multiple abilities at the very least, and one that is very disturbing to all three of the admirals. Just from what I've seen, he can move extremely fast, hit extremely hard, form energy blades, shoot thunder from his hands, shoot black tendrils that pierce flesh easily, and, now here it gets disturbing, he fired lasers from his hands, and a moment later he somehow made me unable to use my ability at all. Sengoku stood up, his face contorted in an expression of outrage, before yelling at the top of his voice. What? How the hell is that possible? You know it's impossible to have multiple abilities. How can this even be? After Sengoku had sufficiently calmed himself he continued. Alright, this is grave indeed. Now he have a pirate that is able to beat any of the three admirals with relative ease thanks to his powers, and on top of that he killed 3 of the Tenryubito, so making him a Shichibukai is out of the question. How can we defend the peace if another evil pirate has shown up, this time with the ability to overpower the Marines? What's his name? Kizaru. We have to give him a high bounty. His name is Naruto Uzumaki, but that's not my point, Sengoku. I don't think he's evil. He even told me that he wasn't a pirate. He just stated that he hated rapists and RS, which would explain why the only persons he's killed are the 3 Tenryubito. From what I've heard, he also gets really ticked off if people think they're better than him or demand anything from him. At present he has taken in the Straw Hat, according to him, because they're against rape and enmity, and they got hot girls. From an intelligence report he seems to have a way with all women. Sengoku thought about it for a while, and if the boy really liked the woman of the Straw Hat, then they might convince him to help free Portgas d'Ace, because he is Luffy's brother. But if the boy really went for every pretty woman, then Boahan and Sergeant Major Tashigi might be able to get him on their side, or at least remain neutral. Thank you, Kizaru. Would you please tell my secretary to call in Boahan and Sergeant Major Tashigi? Kizaru nodded and left after telling Sengoku's secretary to call in the aforementioned 2 women. It took a while and Sengoku was starting to get a bit irritated, but the women finally entered, although Boa had an arrogant look on her face. Sengoku sighed, wondering how he was going to bring the news to them, before deciding to just cut straight to the chase. Ladies, we have a problem. About 3 days ago a previously unknown man took out 3 of the Tenryubito, because he hates rapists and RS. However, he is not actually against the world government. He simply hates the aforementioned sorts of people, as well as people who demand things from him or view themselves as superior. Now the reason that this is a problem, since normally we would just have an admiral kill him, was that Kizaru was sent out to capture him for killing the Tenryubito, and Kizaru was beaten. Looks of shock, awe and fear crossed the faces of the 2 ladies. It wasn't every day that an unknown person took out an admiral. What they were more interested in, however, was how this concerned them directly. After all, when you're preparing for an all-out war with the Whitebeard pirates, you didn't have time to worry about anyone else. Even if that person was strong enough to beat an admiral, they simply didn't have enough manpower to worry about anything else right now. So why was Sengoku bringing this up? Sengoku, seeing the gears turn in their heads after he let the information sink in, decided to continue. Now the reason why I am telling you this is that I believe that he will come here for the battle between Whitebeard and the Marines. The reason I believe this is that while he doesn't seem to care much for the plute of random people he meets, he has taken in Monkey D. Luffy, who as you know is the Borther of Portgas d'Ace. The reason I believe he's coming here is that he has a certain thing with women that makes them attracted to him, but he also seems to be bored a lot and is dying for interesting happenings, and it seems women interest him, if you know what I mean. I think that the 2 women on the Strafat's crew have convinced him to come here and help them save Ace from the execution. The eyes of the ladies widened. The guy who can beat an admiral might be coming here to oppose them in an already uncertain battle. They truly felt that they were unlucky to have the possible risk of having to face such a man in battle. But why was Sengoku telling them this? The only thing this would do was bring their morales down, and that would in turn decrease their effectiveness in battle against the man he mentioned? Sensing the slight despair in their minds, Sengoku debated on how to continue. He could just give them their orders, but in order to maximize their effectiveness he would have to explain exactly why he wanted them to follow them. According to the powers that Kizaru mentioned, none of the admirals or even me stand much of a chance against the boy, and while he may not wish us any direct harm, his presence, and the rescue of Ace could ruin our entire plan. Now seeing that he was convinced by two rather attractive women to come here, I think it would be best for us to not try to combat someone as powerful as him, because if he does permanently take the side of the pirates, the possibilities of us losing this war is very possible. And as such you are to seduce him if possible, or at least keep him from attacking us. And according to eyewitness reports it won't be hard to notice him, since the female witnesses said that he had an air around him that made them want to submit themselves to him in lust, and that they would do anything for his love. And as for why I told you to seduce him instead of lure him in and kill him, he is way too powerful to let go to waste. If you can get him close to you, you might be able to get him on our side. The only problem with this plan is that if we don't keep him interested he will probably leave. That is why at least until we are able to ship in a few regular beautiful females, or convince any of the admirals to spar with him, since he seemed to be quite interested in the admirals. You are to act like you are in love with him. However, if you actually do love him, you may continue to stay with him for as long as you like. Do you understand? They both looked slightly outraged by being used as bargaining tools, but they understood the danger. Boa, not as loyal as Toshigi, took comfort in the fact that since this guy apparently hated RS and rapists, he would probably not take advantage of her unless she would let him do so. It was entirely logical to her that she, the most beautiful woman in existence, would be quite useful in convincing this unknown man to take the side of the Marines, and as much as she hated allowing someone to touch her, she understood that she had no choice. If she refused, the island of Amazon Lily would be decimated by the Marines for supporting pirates. So she simply nodded at her orders, refusing to actually dignify that with a spoken answer. Her, the most beautiful woman on earth, being forced to act like a common slut in order to save the Marines' asses. Much later, day of the war between Whitebeard and the Marines. After a long time of flying in the ship they were finally pretty close to Marineford. The long flight was actually quite pleasant due to the pleasurable company of two beautiful ladies, as well as the interesting antics that the Straw Hats would often display. As they moved closer they saw what appeared to be a huge battle taking place. Giant walls of ice were keeping in the pirates as, on the inside of the ice walls a siege wall was raised, filled with cannons. The only good thing for the pirates at that point was that one section of the siege wall was unable to rise due to the fact that some kind of giant was laying for dead right on top of it. As they neared, Naruto went over some final things with the Straw Hat, who were all currently gathered near the front of the deck, so that they could see the battle going on from a distance. The amazement that they were flying had long since passed. "Alright you guys, I promised to help you, but I will be taking care of everything. This interests me and I have a few tricks up my sleeve in case things get out of hand. You will stay inside of the ship. If any of you die, Nami and Robin will be sad and I will not allow you to fight. If you refuse or try to disobey I will paralyze you completely until the fight is over. Understood?" The Straw Hat just nodded in slight fear of his suddenly serious demeanor. While they knew he meant well, it sounded more like a threat to them, but they decided to obey his will. It was not like they were powerful enough to challenge him anyways. Naruto nodded at their agreement and psyched himself up for the fight that was soon to follow. With Whitebeard, Edward Newgate was worried. This entire battle had been a mystery. The Marines were just pulling one trick after another out of their sleeves. The battle was actually looking quite grim for the pirates, considering the damage the army of Pacifista was doing to their forces. And to be made worse, the Shichibukai were currently fighting with all their might. The three admirals were also busy decimating loads of pirates, even though they had a completely different level of strength compared to the pirates in the first half of the Grand Line. They just couldn't compare to the training and respective abilities that the three possessed. The only actual battle that seemed to have a chance of them winning against the three was Marco the Phoenix Varus Akainu, since Marco's Phoenix abilities allowed him to combat the heat of Akainu's magma. He was soon shocked out of his worries though as the skies grew dark, a huge ship gliding through the air and stopping about 300 meters above Marineford. His jaw dropped open as he realized that a ship was just hovering in midair. With the Marines. Battle stopped as the shadow fell over the battlefield. All looked up in curious and apprehensive glances as a new faction seems to have joined the battle. They all gaped in shock and amazement as a huge ship seemed to stop in the middle of the sky. Sengoku gaped in incomprehension. How was this possible? Who was the commander of that ship? Was it Naruto? If it was, then he had grossly underestimated the level of technology he possessed, and that could cause him severe problems. If this Naruto was intelligent enough to create something like this, who is to say that he's not too smart to fall for a simple seduction? He was shocked out of this disturbing thoughts when an otherworldly voice rang through the air, a screen in the bottom hull showing a picture of Naruto speaking. Surrender now, you are outmatched, both Marines and pirates will stop the battle now, or I will initiate the attack. The short-lasted silence in the battle was soon over after the announcement as everyone began screaming in defiance, screaming that they were the Whitebeard pirates, or the elite Marines respectively, and that they would not surrender to some nobody who nobody had heard from before. The Naruto just sighed and raised one eyebrow, before shrugging off their unfortunate fate, and addressed his ship. Talon, ready my forces for launch, fire the lightning cannon to disable the siege wall, and then open the rocket pods and decimate at least half of them. A metallic affirmative was heard before a segment at the bottom of the ship began to glow an eerie blue, before a hatch opened, revealing a fully charged energy beam. For a moment everyone could feel the weird sparkly feeling of the charge being fired at the wall. Suddenly a humongous bolt of lightning shot out and hit the siege wall head-on. The immense heat melted the wall like it was an ice sculpture. Some screams were heard from the Marines inside of the wall being electrocuted, but they were quickly silenced as molten stone encompassed them entirely. All present didn't even have time to gape in wonder as suddenly about 10,000 hatches opened in the bottom of the ship, before tens of thousands of missiles came flying out, leaving a dark blue trail behind as they sped towards the ground. There was no time to dodge. All of the missiles hit the ground and in a single huge explosion, 80% of the Marines and pirates were taken out. All of the remaining forces were stammering in shock, amazement, and fear at the power that was unleashed with just a command from Naruto. Suddenly a multitude of pods shot out from the ship at incredible speeds, burying themselves into the ground until only the door remained above ground, which soon shot open and revealed various forces totaling around 2,000 in number. A second later a bright beam shot from the Talon into the ground, even as the hatches on the side of the giant ship slid open, instantly followed up by hundreds of locusts swarming out of the ship, intimidating the enemy even more. As the bright beam hit the ground, 3 giant 6-armed robots appeared. That alone was more than enough to scare both factions into submission. The locusts stood still in the air, awaiting the possible order to attack. The most intimidating, however, was when the ninja, mantis, and medics popped out their energy blades, holding them low so that everyone could see that they cut through the ground with ease. Finally Naruto came flying down, donning only his pants, hat and his 3 pairs of angel wings pointing out at different angles. As soon as he touched the ground, he spoke, in an amused voice. "See, you should have just surrendered. Now that I have your attention I am going to cut you guys a deal. Personally I don't give a shit about your battle for justice or whatever. I am merely a person who loves interesting things and this battle interests me, so I will allow you to continue in a minute. However, I am here to save Ace since it was a request from a certain orange-haired lady on the crew of Monkey D. Luffy. So with that being said I will take care of Ace's protection during the battle. Now because I don't care about your battle you will do best to view me as a neutral faction, and as long as nothing interests me enough I will stay neutral, just doing whatever I want. Now then carry on." After he finished Naruto snapped his fingers, and a barrier appeared around Ace, then he flew up towards where Sengoku was watching the battle from, and landed sprawled out on a sofa that just appeared out of nowhere, watching the battle with interested eyes. Completely ignoring the nervous glances of Sengoku he announced in a loud voice. "Troops, back into the battleship. Talon, as soon as everyone is inside put up the reflector shields. I don't want the paint to get a scratch during the battle." As soon as he was done talking and everyone was done freaking out because of the robotic voice that answered the blonde, the battle continued, although it seemed a bit awkward since they knew that the ship that was currently ominously hovering above them could wipe them out at any time. Marco was still battling furiously with Akainu, although both were occasionally shooting cautious glances towards the young god, checking if he was indeed remaining neutral like he said he would. Whitebeard himself was continuously sending out small earthquakes, making it hard for the Marines who weren't used to battling in this condition to fight normally. Kizaru is decimating several pirates, although he shooting nervous glances at the blonde, most likely from his earlier defeat. As the bottle raged on, Naruto continued to look on in interest as he gained ideas for new weapons and abilities from watching these devil fruit users. Suddenly Naruto saw something that made him narrow his eyes and made his aura flared a bit. Two beautiful women were about to be killed. One looked innocent, and seemed to be the girl next door, cute, her short black hair and her clumsiness perfectly accentuating that charm. The other one had a body that was fit for a goddess. She wore a red dress, had perfectly perky D or even E cup S, had long sensual legs, and long silky smooth raven hair. As soon as the girls saw that they were about to die and screamed, Naruto stopped time completely with but a thought, before he went over to the cute one, took her in his arms and flew over to his personal sofa, where the then proceeded to lay her down gently on the spot where he just laid. He flew over to the Y1 and held her in a bridal position, before flying over to his sofa again, and as soon as he arrived and landed, he allowed time to resume its normal course. The two girls waited for a moment, continuing to scream, before they slowly opened their eyes, both staring at their savior with blushes on their cheeks. Boa's was heavier, however, as she felt his toned muscle and saw his chiseled face. She sighed in contentment and nuzzled further into his hold. Maybe she won't mind having to seduce him. But what if he saw she was originally a? Would he reject her? Would he use her like many tried before him? Or would he possibly accept her? Then she remembered that Sengoku had told her that this man hated RS and rapists, and her heart grew warm. Was there finally a man worthy of her? Tashigi couldn't believe it. Had this supposedly evil guy just saved her life? Even more surprising, she couldn't see any lust in his eyes, which was normally seen in people who would demand payback for their services. Even though she had sworn to vanquish all evil, she didn't think that she could kill him even if he gave her the chance. The aura he gave off inspired awe, and his pheromones turned her on. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the person she was supposed to seduce, and she couldn't help but feel lucky that this was her orders, otherwise, she would get punished severely for flirting with pirates. The battle raged on, but it seemed like the pirates were slowly losing the war. Even though Akainu and Aokiji were held up fighting a single enemy, Kizaru was picking up the slack and was downing pirates left and right. He was limiting himself to using pinpoint strikes instead of his usual spree of widespread destruction to make sure he didn't severely injure or kill any of his comrades. The real problem for the pirates, though, was the army of pacifista that had shown up. They were amazingly resistant to damages, and their repeated blasts of laser beams were devastating. A major turn in the battle was that Whitebeard was critically wounded, resulting in his ability only working at half its usual power. On the other hand, the Marines were crippled by the loss of their siege wall, which was their ace in the hole should the pirates be too powerful. Eventually the pirates called for a retreat, and the entire fleet left under covering fire from Marco, the only one who could fly after them if he was left behind. Naruto couldn't let them leave without a present, however, so he levitated Ace and flew him towards the retreating ships with superb speeds. He didn't miss the outraged cries of Sengoku that they failed to execute Ace for his crimes. But eventually Sengoku calmed down and looked towards Naruto, who was still standing as he was an hour ago, holding a happy boa in a bridal position, and when he gathered the courage he asked him a question. "What are you going to do now, Mr. Uzumaki?" Naruto glanced at Sengoku with a contemplative expression on his face, wondering indeed what he would do now. On one hand, he still had to get the Straw Hat to the other side of the red line, but on the other hand he really wanted to stay with these two new ladies. After a while of thought he decided that he would do both. He would first get the Straw Hat over the red line, and then he would come back here and stay with the newcomers. It would allow him some time to have his fun with the women on the Strafat's crew, as well as give him the opportunity to get something interesting to do. "Well, Mr. Sengoku, I believe that I will first get Straw Hat Luffy to the other side of the red line. After that I think I'm going to go to Marijoy for some negotiations. I advise you and the two ladies I just saved to make sure to be there when I do. More importantly, if I were you, I'd inform your Holy Land not to do anything hostile to me if they see me, because I'm going to be flying the Straw Hats over the red line. If anyone fires at my ship, I'll make sure that compared to Marijoy's, this place will look like a children's fight. Now then, I'll take my leave." Naruto set Boa down gently, to her chagrin, and started levitating slowly towards his ship, when suddenly he was stopped by a loud shout of, "Wait!" Turning around slowly to see who said that, he saw Boa with a pleading look in her eyes, her hands clasped together as if she was begging for something. "Please take me with you. Naruto-kun, Sengoku looked at her with a gaping jaw. Was the pirate empress asking a man to take her with him on his journey? It just wasn't possible. Naruto just nodded and floated down for just a moment. He then held her tightly in his arms while floating up again, which caused a soft to escape her lips and her blush to rise exponentially. As they neared the ship, a rift opened up in the barrier and they flew into the ship, leaving all the surviving Marines gaping in awe as the ship slowly turned around, before accelerating at a frightening pace, allowing them to look at the ship only for 30 more seconds before it had disappeared out of sight. Naruto's face, he groaned annoyingly as he tried to shield his eyes from the burning light, but stopped upon noticing his arms constricted to his sides. It was only then that he noticed a certain weight that was pressed upon him, and two fairly large globs of flesh pressing into his midsection. At first he was confused, until he remembered last night, which made a smile appear on his face. It was a really fun night. He lamented the fact that it was time to wake up already. He was really tempted to go back to sleep, but the fact remained that they were almost upon the red line again, and his ship wasn't intelligent enough to decide whether to go over or under it by itself, so he had to wake up or they couldn't continue on. As he tried to extricate himself slowly from Robin's enjoyable grip, there was a knock on the door. He grumbled about people not leaving him alone in the morning, but he nonetheless got up and flashed his clothes on. He slowly walked to the door and opened it, only to see Sanji looking right at him, then at Robin, who while covered by the sheets was quite obviously, then to him again, before he literally exploded in anger, screaming about him taking the innocence of his beautiful Robin Schwan, and consequently waking everyone up. Naruto groaned in frustration. For the first time in a while he was actually happy that he would separate from the Straw Hats somewhere around today. He knocked Sanji out with a chop to the neck and levitated him to the deck, where he dropped him on the grass like a sack of potatoes, before he made a mental command to his ship to rise and fly over the red line. The ship jerked into movement immediately, causing everyone who was just getting out of bed, except Robin, who was still way too tired from the previous night to wake up let alone move, to fall over and hit the ground in comical ways, causing him to burst out in laughter as he got the mental images from Talon, making sure to suppress his blush at seeing Nami like that. Damn, she truly had a nice body. After a while everyone was up, still grumbling sleepily at being woken up by the noisy cook. They finally started on breakfast, eating aside as they realized they wouldn't be able to see the world from this high anymore after Naruto was gone. Robin was sitting at her chair positively glowing as she had a blissful smile on her face, and every time she looked at Naruto she would sigh contentedly, causing the other members of the crew to look at her strangely. Sure, she was always smiling, and she always looked kinda happy, but she never had such of an aura around her that basically conveyed to them like nothing could bring her down today. They collectively wondered why this was, but, although Nami had a suspicion of why she was acting like that, only Sanji would ever truly know, and he sure as hell wasn't going to announce it. After breakfast was over, they soon decided to collectively watch along the side of the ship that was facing the red line, as they truly wanted to see what this Marineford was like. It was called the Holy Land after all. Who wouldn't be curious to see what it was like? Even Naruto, who was normally not really interested in anything, was there to watch, as he knew they would be reaching the top of the red line in about 30 seconds. As they neared the top, they could see the edges of the otherwise solid wall that was the red line breaking up into smaller pieces, most likely due to erosion, and as the Y finally reached the top they were completely shell-shocked. For as far as they could see there were only buildings of the purest white, palaces here and there, most likely housing the Tenryubito, and in the middle of the holy city was a giant lake with beautiful blue water, and in the middle, with a single ornamental bridge leading towards it, was a giant white tower. It wasn't a solid piece of rock like some of the towers you may see, instead it was entirely decorated with designs of leaves, as thought the entire outside wall was instead the milky white leaves of a marble tree. Every 3 levels, they assumed, were decorated on the outside with a golden ring at the very bottom, like it was keeping up that section of the tower. Naruto whistled lowly in appreciation of the side, especially since they were this high up, and idly wondered how the tower handled the extreme winds that could be encountered at this altitude. When Naruto turned towards the Straw Hat, he just saw all of them, except for Nami and Robin, as they decided they were too graceful to do something like that, with their jaws on the floor openly staring at the gigantic white city. He idly noticed that there was a crowd forming in the holy city, all looking at his ship in awe. It was only reasonable, he supposed. It was not like they could see something like this every day. Much to the disappointment of some of the Straw Hats, and to the great relief of others, The great white city was soon long behind them and they started their rapid descent back to the ocean. It was only the artificial gravity field that Naruto had put up that stopped everything in the ship from lifting off as they approached a human's terminal velocity. Within no time they were back at the ocean, and after a tearful goodbye, to some, Naruto dropped them and their ship off at the first island of the second half of the Grand Line, leaving them with a small box that according to Naruto was a tracker, allowing him to find them should he ever need to. The Talon flashed blue, before it became completely black, shocking the entire crew as they never thought the ship could do that, and slowly began rising up from the sea. All of them waving excitedly at their friend. Even if he was taking off they couldn't help but feel glad that they've made such a friend. Within a short while the Talon was once again above the Holy Land, and a certain crowd was already waiting for him, and as his ship flew right above the outskirts of Marineford, where there was at least enough place to comfortably keep the ship afloat, it wasn't like he was gonna keep his ship in the middle of people who want that technology. He descended slowly from his ship, keeping his wings and hat on for some intimidation. They softly flapped as he floated down slowly, before stretching out and settling as he finally landed. He ordered his ship to lock, causing a visible energy barrier to form around it. He was escorted to the central tower by an entourage of nervous Marines. It was obvious that they knew of the danger he posed. When they entered it he was ushered into an elevator, which went to the top of the large tower. It took a while but when the doors finally opened he was in a room with the most powerful men in the world and they looked at him like he would obey their every command. The room was large and round, large windows let the sunlight in from outside. Up in a sort of council setting were the Gorosei, sitting comfortably while they obviously expected him to stand during the talk. Well, Naruto didn't want to give them any pretense of their superiority, and with a hand gesture he made a jacuzzi appear with two women in bikinis in it. One was blonde, and the other had black hair. He flashed his clothes and wings off, but kept his hat on and he flashed himself into the jacuzzi, where the black-haired woman pressed her S into his side and the blonde sat on his lap and leaned into his chest, where he ate her for a moment before finally turning his attention to the old men in the room. To put it bluntly, they were shell-shocked. Not only at the total lack of respect he showed, but also due to the ability that he demonstrated. He created living beings with a wave of his hands and just made objects fare into existence. Naruto sighed and began speaking. "Sue, what do y'all want?" The Gorosei sat stock still for about 30 minutes, which Naruto didn't mind as he was at the moment in quite good company. Eventually, as Naruto was making out with the black-haired woman, they finally gathered their resolve. The one to finally speak looked to be the oldest of the 20. He had a slightly impressive aura of authority around him, even though it didn't even faze Naruto. "Well, Mr. Naruto," he began as Naruto didn't even stop being the black-haired woman, but motioned for him to continue either way. "We want you to work for us, take out those evil pirates as you put it." Naruto finally ended his makeout session and raised a single eyebrow, before speaking in an obviously divine voice that shocked all present. "And what could you possibly offer me to keep me interested long enough to even consider taking orders from a bunch of old men?" The old man frowned at the reply. He obviously didn't expect such resistance to his authority, before he realized that no matter the position he held in the world, the man before him was still strong enough to take out an admiral with ease, not to mention the fact that he could destroy half the city with but a single command. It was obvious that he wasn't going to bow down easily to the wills of people such as himself. The best course of action, he decided, was not to make offers and demands, but let him choose what he gets. "Well, let's just say, what do you want?" Naruto's eyebrow rose and he gave the man an appraising glance. The man was obviously smarter than Naruto gave him credit for, if he was smart enough not to make demands or flip out at the obvious disrespect, and he was even intelligent enough to realize that normal offers probably wouldn't appease him. He smirked roguishly as he thought about his answer. And in the end he spoke, his voice serious as he prepared to watch their reactions. "Well, normally I wouldn't even consider taking orders from someone, but I've realized something. Even if you guys are going about it the wrong way, your original intent was good. Defending people from the masses of pirates inhabiting the seas is a very worthy goal. There are only two problems. 1. Eventually the world government started muscling their way into other countries, forcing them to join in their alliance or war would be declared. That is where it started to go wrong. Eventually you started ignoring the corruption in your organization, and everyone who has defeated a corrupt marine captain or something like that would immediately be branded a pirate, and hunted down even if they only did the right thing at the time. And even if someone calls himself a pirate, you immediately assume that that means that he is evil and must die. This is not true. There are many cases where a pirate crew has committed no sins next to being strong and having a Jolly Roger. Not all pirates are evil, so I'll cut you guys a deal. My demands are simple. 1. I want to see interesting things, so I want to see ideas for research, different abilities that there are, and some results from research and theories. 2. I want to fight some of the guys with strong abilities, including the admirals, semi-regularly. 3. I want a list of all the interesting things you know about, meaning ancient temples, interesting islands, supernatural phenomenon, everything as long as it's interesting enough. 4. I'm going to create a new island somewhere in the Grand Line, with no log pose leading to it, and I want you guys to leave that island alone. 5th and final, I reserve the right to silence anyone that threatens me or otherwise really annoys me. Don't worry, I won't go around killing all your nobles or anything as long as they don't act superior to me or provoke me. Now a last condition is, if I consider a pirate crew you've ordered me after not as evil as you say they are, then I reserve the right to cancel the mission, and look into the next ones with a bit more effort before I go after them. Does that sound acceptable? I realize it may seem a bit much, but trust me. If you agree, I'll show you a sample of my power. The old man frowned heavily, but the entire Gorosei huddled together. The mutterings were quite furious and they conversed for 2 entire hours before they finally reached their decision. Once again, Naruto didn't mind the wait since he was thoroughly enjoying the time with the two beauties in his jacuzzi. He had at some point even slipped a hand into both their bikini bottoms and had fingered them for a while. This went unnoticed because they only whispered their enjoyment in his ear instead of ing out loud. The old man stepped forward again, a frown still adorning his face as he looked Naruto up and down a few times before sighing and giving them their answer. Very well, your conditions are indeed steep, but acceptable. However, we will not show you all the interesting things at once. You will have to earn them. This is a precaution that we know you aren't going to turn on us. Naruto nodded, seemingly pleased at their choice, and gave them a last remark. Very well, but you don't have to worry about me turning on you. Even if I lose interest and want out, I'll simply disappear and you'll never hear from me again, unless you've really pissed me off, of course. Now come and I'll show you my power. They looked slightly skeptical, but Naruto just dismissed his jacuzzi and entourage, and then he flashed himself dry and took his clothes and wings out, before he snapped his fingers and they all disappeared from the room. They reappeared on a platform of energy, floating above a stretch of unmarred open sea. The entire Gorosei looked panicked at the fact that they were suddenly somewhere else, but Naruto called them to attention with a simple flare of his aura. As he saw they were all paying attention, he snapped his fingers once, and at that moment, far out of their sight, outside of the atmosphere of the planet, Prometheus flashed into existence, fully operational and even upgraded since it was last summoned. Instead of just heating the area to 7,000 degrees, it was now upgraded to heat the area to 35,000 degrees, causing everything in the area to turn into gas instantly instead of just melting. A tertiary function was also added, a giant ball of chaotic Yuki-like energy which could be hurled into the planet at the speed of sound. Not only had this ball the effect of normal Yuki, corrupting and destroying everything, this particular sort of energy was made to constantly emit a loud sound until it impacted with its target. The effect of this action was that it outran its own sonic boom, and due to the nature of this sonic boom, the resulting shockwave would be devastating. The third effect that this function had, that although this ball of energy was fired as a whole, the friction of the air would cause little bits of the outside shell to break apart, resulting in a rain of Yuki, severely damaging everyone that somehow managed to evade mortal damage from the first blow. He, however, decided not to use this function, as it tended to mutate organisms in the air into weird viruses and shit, not so useful in the long run unless contained. Its fourth function was a relatively conventional one. The new Prometheus was outfitted with a giant array of weapons, ranging from massive machine guns and a giant railgun, to giant bombs, rockets and energy blasts. It could launch all of the above in a massive barrage of deadly metal and explosions. This was more for surface destruction purposes, although the railgun would probably shoot a very deep hole into the ground. Back on the energy platform, Naruto turned to the representative, the old man, and gave him the options. Alright, old man, you have 3 options here. 1. I could vaporize the entire area in front of us. I could pull a small meteor into Earth, and we'll have to watch out, otherwise this planet won't survive. Or I could make it rain death from the sky, although that would be a little less grand for my impression purposes. They looked at him more than a little confused. Rain death from the sky? What was he talking about? They decided, however, that mocking someone who claimed to be able to do such things was not very wise unless you were sure he wasn't able to actually do it. So the representative decided on the first option. Naruto nodded and spoke out loud. Prometheus, aim 3 miles in front of me. Mode 1. Prepare for a burst at maximum radius, full power. Nothing seemed to happen, but they all got an ominous feeling as the energy field they were on suddenly started rising higher and higher, until they were at least a few miles up in the air. They looked questionably at Naruto but decided to just wait after he snapped his fingers once more and their proverbial floor just gained walls and a ceiling, all made of the same, glass-like energy, so that they could still see. Some of them almost trembled in anticipation as Naruto spoke once again. Now pay attention. Prometheus fire in 3.2.1. Fire. At first nothing seemed to happen, and a few of them were just about ready to lose their temper at the boy who had demanded so much and showed nothing for all of it, when suddenly right above them it was like a second sun had formed. After about 10 seconds a rumbling was heard and it got progressively louder until suddenly in front of them a massive pillar of bright orange light smashed into the sea. The instant vaporization of billions of gallons of water was fleshed out as a massive explosion that seemed to just miss the bottom off their energy shield, and when the blast lifted, they were all shocked, with their jaws lying on the floor in amazement. From the height they were at they could actually see the seafloor, and a massive hole in the sea, which seemed to be filling itself quite fast, but even with the massive amounts of water that were available to refill the sea it still took about 30 seconds before they couldn't see the bottom anymore. And even then the water was still fluctuating so heavily that any ship would capsize within seconds from the violent waves. After about 10 minutes the men were done with gaping at the scene in front of them, and were able to shakily regain their composure even as they eyed Naruto with great fear in their eyes. Naruto simply turned to them and gave them a small smirk. He was pleased at their gobsmacked expressions. This would certainly do as a sample of his power, and it would make sure that they will ensure that none of their faction would even so much as think of messing with him, because if they know he can do that with nothing more than a vocal command, they would never survive it. Was that enough of a display to explain my steep demands, or do I need to cause some more destruction? The men paled considerably at the last question, and hastily answered his question, his tone far more respectful than it had ever been. No, Naruto Dono, that is not necessary. This display was more than enough to justify your demands. Naruto nodded, satisfied with himself. He flashed them back into their council room, even sending them right back to where they had been seated before the little excursion. Naruto then made a hand gesture and in the middle of the room a black pedestal was created. It was about chest height to an average man and on top of it was a golden symbol of 2 angel wings connected to an ornate button of the purest diamond. He turned back to the shocked members of the council. Now if you need me just press this button, and I will be notified. Do not abuse this privilege too much. If you press it too many times for nonsensical things I may just decide not to come, and if you're in actual peril at that time, well, let's not talk about that. Still I expect you to show me many interesting things whenever I do complete a task for you. Failure to do so will have severe consequences. With that he lifted his hat in acknowledgement, before the single pair of wings on his back turned into 3 pairs. Jutting out at varying angles, they wrapped around him and the air turned heavy for a moment. He spoke in a voice that seemed to carry the weight of thousands, before he vanished in a flash of white, the light slowly diminishing until it only remained in the form of the kanji for God, until even that faded away. The Gorosei looked gobsmacked, and shivered at the cold winds that only they could feel. Goodbye. For now, it was 2 weeks before Naruto had been called on for the first time. It seemed that they had taken his warning seriously, and had not contacted him without due reason. Apparently there was a group of evil pirates that had been launching continued attacks on nearby settlements. It appeared that they had taken an uninhabited island and set up a heavily defended base there, and due to the fact that their leader had an ability which was related to creating portals capable of bending space, even the admirals have been unable to actually catch him, since all their big attacks would just be redirected at themselves. It was a task slightly worthy of his presence, and he had gotten an interesting idea for a fighting style. It was actually quite simple. He would take the idea of a portal, make multiple of them, and supply them with various weapons. Gunshots that an enemy would not dodge because it would normally miss, would be redirected to come at them from behind. Fists that were thrown would not even have to be near the enemy, a portal could redirect them. If he made 1,000 blades grow from his back, each could pop up from another spot on the battlefield. An unavoidable blow could be absorbed and redirected to a place where it really didn't matter. As soon as he thought of the style, 3 techniques immediately came to his mind. The first was the maze of death, warping the opponent to a gigantic maze, then popping out blades, guns and blows at will. The second was aptly named the guillotine. A blow by an enemy would be absorbed into a portal, after which the portal would be negated while one half of his leg was out another portal, effectively slicing it off cleanly. The same could be done with a portal at the place the enemy would land, bisecting him completely. The last, and most abstract, would be the swarm. Hundreds upon hundreds of small portals would litter the battlefield. Only wide enough for an arm to pass through. This way the user would be the only one to know where a portal would lead, and could change that to effectively swarm the enemy from all directions, or the enemy could be tightly surrounded by the small portals, while the user had 2 small portals in front of him, effectively giving him the ability to trap the enemy indefinitely and continuously rain blows on them. The reward was, as they stated, an interesting island, the likes of which you probably have never seen before, one that would be a great vacation spot. He had raised an eyebrow at that. He had seen many different things, but he agreed nonetheless. Happy at least that even if the reward turned out to be useless, he at least had gained a new interesting style of fighting. Naruto floated softly above the waters nearby the pirated island. Apparently the island's name rang true. It was dubiously called the Island of Round, which long ago had been inhabited by a group of outlaws aptly named the Raiders of the Round. They had transformed the entire island into what was basically a giant round fortress. It was not as ornate and high class as some of the daimyo's castles had been, but that wasn't the point. This fortress was built for only 2 things, defensibility and efficiency. There was a corridor from any one room to many, many rooms. This basically meant that even due to their great numbers, no corridors would ever be flooded by people trying to get to one location. It also had the added advantage that unless you knew the layout of the castle, you would be at a severe disadvantage. Granted, you could not become entirely lost, as every corridor leads straight to another room, but your efficiency would be almost nullified unless you knew exactly where to go. The corridors twined around each other, so close to each other, yet not connected. It made it almost impossible to invade, as practically every room had a road leading to the exits, and they knew the fortress better than you did. Still, to him it was but a fly, an entertaining and well-organized fly maybe, but a fly nonetheless. He decided against immolating the entire castle instantly and opted to play the game their way. It would certainly be an amusing game of cat and mouse to him. As night fell, he scanned the castle from the outside, determining that there were in total 7 exits and 35 windows, 10 of which a man could fit through. There were a staggering 215 men in there, along with what seemed like 15 women. He could feel the sorrow coming from them, until he blinked in surprise. One of the women seemed to be happy and smug in there. What could that mean? He sealed the exits and all the windows with an unbreakable wall of air. Nothing would be noticed, no changes, no lack of breezes, just the fact that no solids could pass through. He recreated the same barrier in a dome over the entire island, ensuring that none would be able to go anywhere. He blinked himself inside and appeared near one of the exits. None knew he was there, none would realize it. What worked towards his favor in this operation that due to the fact that this fortress was the size of an entire island, therefore the pirates had all the room in the world, each even had their own room, and with the time as it was now, unless he walked up to the drunken guards and yelled that he was going to murder them all, chances are that they would never truly discover him, and even if they did, it would be too late for them. The hunt was on. He stalked through the dark corridors, only lighted at specific intervals by small torches embedded in the wall. He had chosen a random path and waited patiently to see where it would bring him. He had decided to stay silent for the most part, and only become flashy when a large part of the pirates had been eliminated. This had the added advantage that while making the chase fun and interesting, he wouldn't have to search hours to get all of the pirates. Another advantage of the castle that the layout was so complex that it would actually mimic the maze of death. There were no exits, and no chance to escape his wrath. As he reached the end of the corridor, he was greeted by a large room that held about 50 doors, all leading to a room that one of the pirates inhabited, as well as nearly 20 corridors leading off to other parts of the castle. He grinned softly before he made his way to the first door, and phased through it silently. He was disappointed at what he found inside the rooms. They were nothing more than average men that had barely learned to wield a sword without dismembering themselves in the process. The elimination was fast and efficient. None even woke up before their deaths. The only reason he was able to estimate their skills was because a few were still awake by the time he entered, and were eventually alerted by the faint smell of blood that had seeped through the doors to the rooms. 50 men were eliminated silently in less than 5 minutes. And when Naruto stepped out, his clothes were still spot-free, the shadow of his white fedora obscuring his eyes from any curious enough to look. His muscles rippled as he set off into a silent sprint into another of the silent corridors. His eyes glowed eerily in the dark as he entered another room. This one was fairly larger, and it showed because the amount of doors had doubled to 100, and over 40 corridors leading into other parts of the castle. He was truly disturbed by the amount of corridors this castle possessed. He wondered if it was even possible to get familiar with the entire castle, as there were no labels or directions that indicated where all the corridors lead. The next batch of men were slightly stronger than the last 50. Some even had the ability to use some crude sword techniques, that while they looked horribly unpolished to a master swordsman, was a large step up from barely managing to swing a sword around without harming yourself. Nonetheless, even though all 100 of the men were alert enough to fight him, they were way too overconfident in their abilities, and none even took steps to call for backup, all certain that they could obliterate him. They were batted away like measly ants standing before a gigantic titan of destruction, none even realizing the hopelessness of their efforts until they were already dead. He continued on, unaffected by the horrible deaths he had caused. Spears of light sticking out of the chests of some, gaping holes in the chests of others. Some were literally turned into nothing but a fine red mist as they were attacked so viciously that the friction caused the blood to evaporate. However, it would be hours before he would find the others. In a fortress that was laced with thousands of corridors, he walked around, constantly coming into empty rooms or rooms that held small amounts of treasure. It was only after 3 hours of searching the fortress that he lost his patience and let out a pulse of energy, sensing all alive in the giant fortress. He found 14 women in a dungeon of some kind, while the remaining 65 men were in more luxurious quarters, and the last woman slept peacefully in the royal bedroom, if it could be called royal, since no queens or kings have ever lived here. He first decided to take care of the larger concentration, and moved accordingly through the corridors. Eventually the corridor became wider and wider, until there was enough space for him to stretch his wings comfortably. Going once again for intimidation, he flashed away his hat and made a halo appear in its place. His wings once again turned into 3 pairs jutting out at different angles, and his eyes started glowing a bluish white as he saw the ornate doors leading to the last room. He glared at the door, and it suddenly launched itself from its hinges, flying forward and hitting the throne with a giant crash. Instantly all the pirates, including their leader, was awakened by the loud noise, and stormed into the throne room, only to see a vengeful angel staring at them. The men gulped in fear, even though the resolve in their eyes showed him that they were much stronger than those ants he destroyed earlier. The woman looked at him in awe, fear and lust. All the emotions were clear in her eyes, and it showed that she was too conflicted to do anything as she just stood there gaping at him. He held his left hand to the side and blue fire phased into existence, seemingly flowing out of his arm, forming a horizontal length right in front of him, blinding all present until the light faded away. In its place was a long black blade, a stripe of blue glowing light present in the middle of the blade. Soft glowing blue runes engraved on either side, giving it a ghastly appearance. It floated calmly to his hand, where he grasped it tightly. He held it in one hand as he spoke to them, his divine voice echoing through the castle and solidifying their fear of him greatly. You have been considered guilty of multiple murders and unforgivable acts such as rape, lie and the like. You have stolen from innocent people just to sat your own devilish desires. State your last words. Your punishment is death. They all gasped in horror at their death sentence. From his appearance alone they knew they couldn't beat the man before them. They were doomed, but they couldn't resist to act their usual confident way. The only exception was their leader, who was looking at the man in absolute horror, unable to do anything more than simply stare at him, not even making a motion to get into a battle-ready stance. The other men had in the meantime worked up the courage to scoff. They were the elites of their crew after all, and they would not be intimidated so easily, even though they had to admit that the man before them was indeed scary. They drew their swords, trying to match the show that Naruto had put on when he had drawn his own, and failing miserably to do so. They charged as one at the boy before them, never even realizing what trouble they were currently in. Naruto was quick to react as his blade flashed multiple times. Suddenly the bodies of half of the thugs erupted in a flurry of blood as massive gashes appeared all over their bodies. Naruto raised his other hand and blasts of energy hit half of the remaining men, causing them to explode in a flurry of gore. He turned and glared at two of the men. Instantly they were lifted off the ground and slammed into the walls repeatedly as high speeds, crushing their spines and pulverizing their heads into mush. Only 14 of the men were left at the moment. They all blinked in confusion as several Narutos split from his body, melding out of him, complete with a fully functional sword, and slaughtered the rest of them with incredible ease. The fight was over and the only one that was still standing before him was the lone woman, who he surmised must be the one with the ability, who only had the look of horror on her face increased as all of her elites were wiped out in less than 30 seconds. She bowed her head down in submission. Naruto walked up to her, a cold expression on his face as he spoke to her. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, fiend?" Tears of shame spread down her face. She had no excuse for what she had done. She spoke in a voice hampered only by her tears. "No, I do not. I know what I did was wrong, but it was the only way for me to survive in this world. I have no excuses for my horrible deeds, but I had to survive some way." Naruto's eyes softened considerably, but he could not just let her live and leave. His honor demanded that he finish his mission once he had decided to complete it. Suddenly his face lit up as he thought of a good idea. "Very well, mortal, you will be given one more chance. I will not doom you to hell right as of now." Her head shot up, disbelief written all of her face, even as the trails of her tears were still abundant on her face. "Why, you're going to let me live?" He shook his head no, and her face fell immediately. She had thought she would be able to better herself and start over, be given a proverbial second chance. "No, I will not. I will however claim your soul as mine. I will reincarnate you in this world. I will mark you as mine, and your very soul will record every good and bad deed you do. You will remember this life, but if you do not change your ways during that life, you will suffer even more than you would if I would doom you now. I would create a personal circle of hell for you. This is your last chance to be allowed into eternal paradise. If you however do not do enough for salvation, but not enough for damnation either, you will be my eternal servant. Do you understand?" "Yes, I do." "Very well, now stand before me, mortal." She did as he told her and looked at him with gratitude clear in her eyes, and even though she was covered in blood, for a brief moment she looked angelic to him. He smiled a soft smile before he spoke, his tone no longer divine, but a soft tone that made her blush madly when she looked into his no longer glowing cerulean blue eyes. "Mortal, do you accept this second chance, this pact and the duty to change your very soul?" She nodded happily, and he smiled at her. He took her hand and she shivered as a bit of divine energy was imprinted on her very soul, and an elaborate array with the kanji for property of God appeared on her hand. He looked her in the eyes with a piercing gaze and spoke once more. "This will mark you as my property, mortal. Be wary of those spiritually aligned, for they will be able to see this mark, and they will try to worship you. If I notice you let them do this to you, you will fail and will be terminated accordingly. Do you understand?" She nodded again as she didn't trust her voice to relay the message, and his smile grew slightly wider. "Very well, now come here." He took her in his arms and his wings wrapped around her. She only had time to think about how heavenly it felt before he spoke again and ate her right on the lips, at the same time breathing the required energy into her. It wasn't strictly necessary, of course, but it was a nice little reward for his efforts. Divine art of rebirth. She went limp in his arms immediately from the pleasure of his lips on hers and from the feel of the energy rushing through her body, cleansing her soul of all sins, before after a minute the life left her as somewhere else on an island. A baby was born. He sealed her body in a pocket dimension, and took off toward the dungeon, where the other 14 women were kept. He phased through the walls, not wanting to walk through the veritable maze that were the castle corridors, slowly but surely approaching his destination. But when he got there he was beyond infuriated. All of the women were chained to the wall and floor, their legs perpetually spread, exposing their most sacred spots to everyone. Their eyes were dead, their bodies foiled, desecrated by so much bodily fluids that the whole room reeked of a disgusting smell of rotten semen. He snarled in rage and all the women looked up at him in shock and fear, clearly fearing what he would do to them, that he would berate them, insult them and rape them. His face immediately softened as he saw their looks of horror and he smiled kindly at them. Do not worry, I am not here to harm you, or use you. The men that did that are all dead. They looked at him in disbelief, mistrust, and even a slight bit of hope. One of them, clearly the newest addition, as she still had a bit of life left in her eyes, pleaded with him. Desperation was clear in her voice as she looked at him in hope. Really? We don't have to be used anymore? He nodded at her while smiling kindly. He truly did hope that they would recover of this doubtlessly traumatizing experience. He waved his hands and their bodies were cleaned. The smell was banished from the room and replaced with a soft natural scent. He snapped his fingers and their chains disappeared. He snapped again and the signs of malnutrition on their bodies disappeared. He had to admit that they were beautiful. When they looked at him in shock again, they suddenly blushed and looked away. He wondered why until he saw that he was once again shirtless. He smiled to himself and snapped his fingers once again, and a tight black shirt suddenly adorned his body, doing a little to lessen their blushes but nonetheless allowing them to look at him as they stood up groggily, not used to being able to move again. They moved hesitantly to stand before him, still vastly ashamed that they were currently, and they knew that their savior was still a man, even though they had to restrain a shiver as he eyed them all. Clearly they thought he was ogling them. Frowning at them he spoke again, while pointing at 3 of the women. You 3, come closer. The 3 in question tensed considerably as he spoke, but hesitantly moved forward, still not entirely trustful, but disobeying would not get them anywhere. They gasped as Naruto suddenly took one of them in his arms, and the woman in question trashed until his halo flared and his wings wrapped around her. He whispered softly in her ear and she instantly became still. Don't worry, I'm going to heal you all right. She nodded, still slightly unsure of what he was doing before he spoke again, but staying still nonetheless. Divine art of healing. He pressed his lips gently to hers and she couldn't help but whimper at the pleasurable feeling of his lips on hers and the following immensely pleasurable sensation of an energy heating up her entire body. She continued to as the energy moved through her body at incredible speeds, healing her broken wrist, cracked skull, and blue eye. After about a minute the healing was complete, and he broke and released her. The distrusting women were stunned as the woman emerged completely healed. They immediately knew why those women were called to him. They were the ones that were actually wounded during the rape and never treated, and now he had healed her, and judging by the clouded eyes and dazed expression on her face it must have felt quite nice. He repeated the process with the other 2 women, and both came out fully healed. He motioned for the women to stand before him and snapped his fingers. Immediately they were clothed in ornate kimonos. They gasped in shock before they squealed in amazement at their new clothes. He turned to them and asked, Well, what are you going to do now? I imagine your family and friends are no longer alive due to the filthy pirate scum, so what do you want to do? They looked at each other and murmured a bit, before they eventually came to a decision. I guess we're going to new islands, and start up a new life somewhere. Naruto nodded, satisfied that they weren't going to rely on him to guide them through the rest of their lives. He snapped his fingers and 3 fairly large heaps of gold and other such riches appeared. He snapped his fingers again and every woman gained a white necklace of 2 angel wings, with a glowing blue gem in the middle. This is what you can call your starting capital. Share evenly amongst yourselves. This should help you start your new life. The necklaces I just gave you are one-time teleporters. Just think of which island you want to go to, and say teleport, and you will be there. Do you understand? They all nodded and thanked him. Well then ladies, I shall take my leave. He turned around and his wings wrapped around him. In a bright flash he was gone again, the kanji for God staying behind for a while before finally dispersing, leaving 14 stunned women in his wake. Marineford, council room. Naruto appeared in a bright flash, shocking the Gorosei, who were currently in a meeting with the head of a Tenryubito family. The Tenryubito was outraged that a mere commoner would barge in on his meeting and started yelling at Naruto, until with a wave of his hand, he suddenly found that he could no longer speak. Ignoring the random flailing of the silenced nobleman, he walked up to the Gorosei, and stated in a lazy tone. Mission completed. You need to see the body of the leader? The old men paled at having a dead body in their council room and waved him off. No, that's fine Naruto Dono. Naruto nodded and spoke again. Now the reward is negotiated please? They nodded and gave him an eternal pose. Very well. If you follow the arrow on this special compass you will be lead to an island that's made of clouds. It flies at an altitude of roughly 10,000 kilometers. Have fun. Naruto nodded, snapped his fingers and disappeared again in a bright flash of light. And as soon as he was gone, the nobleman could speak again. Naruto stepped out of Ichiraku Ramen, and stretched out contentedly in the sun. He was just about to go training when he felt the telltale signs of Ascension coming in. He waited for a moment, not taking any chances since the council had tried to get him in trouble for ridiculous things. Instantly 3 Anbu appeared in a swirl of leaves, surprising him at the amount. Normally they would just send 1 Anbu. Uzumaki Naruto, you have been summoned by the council and the Hokage. One of them stated before he put a hand on Naruto's shoulder and shunshined them to the council chambers. Council chambers, they appeared in a swirl of leaves and the room sprung into action. Immediately several Yuki and chakra suppressing seals were slapped onto Naruto and his hands and feet were cuffed together. When he finally realized it, he was already completely restrained and couldn't do a thing to stop it. He looked up into the room, a panicked look visible on his face as he saw his friends, the council and the Hokage grinning evilly at him. In a raised and outraged voice he asked them, "What the hell is this all about?" Their evil grins got even larger if possible. "We're just making sure that you cannot resist after we tell you that we are turning you over to the Akatsuki." His eyes widened in horror at the complete seriousness in their tone. He couldn't believe it. His friends, were they just going to let them turn him over? He looked around frantically but he couldn't find her. Where was she? "What? But I have finally made friends here." He was cut off by the Hokage speaking to him in a malicious voice. "No number, you have no friends here." What? They were all just instructed to act like your friends. They even got mission pay from it. Nobody really cares about you, Naruto. You were just being kept happy. It's a shame that we have to give up the facade. You have become quite an asset to the village, but I'm sure they will all be happy to finally be rid of you. His world shattered. All his bonds, his friendships were nothing more than a deception. Even her? Was she just another pawn to string him along? To keep him loyal? He just couldn't believe it. He wouldn't believe it. Lies. And you, Ba-on? You care about me, right? You even gave me your necklace? The words were there, but his voice was empty. Desperation had already set in. "Huh. I can't believe you still haven't realized it. That was nothing more than a trick. A safeguard in case you were ever to go out of control. Don't you remember that in combination with the Mokuton powers of Yamato it can suppress the demon in your body? That entire mission was nothing more than a setup. I faked resistance and animosity just so you wouldn't figure it out. I can't believe that we've put so much effort into it while you didn't realize a thing." They all grinned wider at his expression of horror. He had fallen for all of their traps, and when he realized it, his spirit is completely crushed. It was priceless. The demon child had finally gotten his just desserts. Jiraiya stepped forward and painted a seal on Naruto's uncovered back, just where he himself couldn't reach it. As he was done, he seared it into his back and grinned evilly at Naruto. "With this seal we can track and incapacitate you whenever we want. You can't escape from us anymore. If you attack anyone with a Konoha headband, you will also be incapacitated due to the seals on the Hite 8, and if you try to commit suicide, the seal will stop that too, because you wear your own headband, and the moment you put it on, the seal was burned into your brain. We're going to let you walk around for your last day alive. We'll let you drown in your sorrow, and relish in your grief as you realize everyone is cheering for your death." And with that he uncuffed Naruto, and removed the suppressing seals, letting Naruto, all but broken in spirit, shun away in despair. He needed to confirm it. Was she in on this? He had to know. He arrived at the Hokage monument and sat down soullessly. He wrote a letter, drops of his tears all over the paper, before handing it to a shadow clone who shunshined to her house. Sushi apartment building, room 203. Kurenai sat on the couch, happily humming to herself as she wondered when she would see him again, already making plans for their next meeting. She was brought out of her line of thoughts when a Naruto clone appeared in her apartment, but rather than smile at her it was frowning, and it couldn't look her in the eye. She was about to ask what was wrong before it handed her a letter and dispelled itself, leaving her behind with only an envelope, a feeling of dread forming in her stomach. She hesitantly opened the envelope. What was it? Had he cheated on her? Didn't he want to be with her anymore? She had to hold back a sob as the seal on the envelope finally gave way, but it increased, although with different reasons, when she read the letter inside. It read, "Was it all a lie? If not, meet me on top of the monument." Naruto. The content of the letter was cryptic, though she immediately knew its meaning, especially from the marks on the paper left behind by his tears. Was their relationship a lie? The thought itself shocked her. How could he think that their entire relationship was a lie? A man she loved like no other. She frowned at the thought of what must have happened to make him question her. What could have shaken his world so much that he would doubt even her? Filled with worry, she instantly body-fared over to the monument, determined to find out what had happened to him. Hokage Monument. She appeared within a swirl of leaves, shocked to the core at beholding the one sight she never thought she would ever see. Naruto was looking at her with dead eyes, like he had given up on everything. His entire face was wet from tears, red and puffy. She almost felt her heart break at the condition he was in. She rushed over to him and took him in her arms, and he sobbed freely into her shirt. Was it all a lie, Kurenai? The question straight from his mouth shocked her way more than the letter ever could, and she looked into his eyes, giving him a glare that made him flinch away from her. Of course not, you baka. Why the hell would you think that? She spoke with her hands on her hips, demanding an answer from him, but she was shocked as he just hugged her so tightly it was almost painful. She wanted her question answered, but nonetheless she stayed silent in his arms until he told her of his own volition. Finally, after about 20 minutes, he finally spoke, and the answer shocked her. They betrayed me, Kurenai. All of them. They were never my friends. They were paid to act like they were. No one cares about me. They all want me dead. They're turning me over to Akatsuki, Kurenai. They even put a seal on me so I couldn't possibly escape. I was so afraid that you were a part of it, Kurenai, that everything between us was but a lie to keep me loyal, like my friends were. He continued sobbing, and she just couldn't believe it. The village would just give Naruto to the enemy. It just wasn't possible. And all his friendships were fakes, created just for the sake of keeping him loyal. She wrapped her arms around him, keeping him close, finally understanding why he would have doubted even her. She knew she could never understand his pain, and she couldn't do anything to stop it from happening. If he was sealed, he couldn't fight them, and if he couldn't fight, then she didn't even have a shadow of a chance to get them both out of here. As much as it hurt her, they couldn't do anything, and even if they could, Naruto's spirit was broken. He wouldn't be able to fight his so-called friends. They sat there for hours. Naruto slowly calmed down until he just decided to enjoy his last few hours with her. He would have taken her and ran away, but it was of no use. They could incapacitate him, and then they would kill her for being with him under the pretense of missing Nin and the like. End flashback X. And so I was delivered right to their doorstep on the condition that my village would be left alone, and they began extracting my demon, which would kill me as I stated before. There was just one thing they didn't expect. The Biju weren't really demons. Instead, they were the separated powers of a god. Only their hatred of the three gods that separated them caused them to hate all humans, who were shaped in their likeness. When they were sealing the final beast, mine, the Biju decided that it would not end like this and reversed the technique, imbuing me with all their power. A giant explosion was the result, vanquishing an entire dimension and leaving only me behind. Because that day I became a god. During the story, Boa's eyes grew sadder and sadder, until she eventually hugged him to soothe the pain his soul must be feeling. Eventually she even cried for him as she heard about how all his friends betrayed him, while muttering that she didn't know and that she was sorry for the way he lived, which made Naruto smile. However, as he said that he became a god, she released him in shock and looked at him with wide eyes. A god? You can't be serious. Naruto smiled fondly as he tangled a hand in her hair and massaged her scalp softly, which made her sigh in pleasure, before he spoke again. No, really, I mean it. Currently I am a god. She looked skeptical. To what extent? His smile only grew wider as she asked her question. All the way, Boa-chan. The very fabric of the universe is my plaything. If I so wish it, all humans would be but toys to entertain me. I can shut off the sun, nullify all gravity. Make metal have the properties of jelly. Everything I want, I can do. She looked at him in disbelief. Prove it. Sure, what should I do? Think of anything. She looked contemplative, striking a cute thinking pose, trying to come up with the most impossible thing she could think of at the moment. She eventually decided. All right. Turn the gravity off and make the sky red. He smiled at her and replied. All right, but only for a short while. I could be dangerous. She looked confused. Why is it dangerous then? He sighed and started to explain. Look at it like this. The earth is spinning, correct? She nodded. Over the earth is a layer of air. Furthermore, the water is spinning with the earth. The centrifugal force is pulling them away from the earth, but Earth's gravity keeps them all on Earth. If I release the gravity for too long, not only will all the humans be lifted up and fall to their deaths when I turn it back on, there is also the matter that all the air and water will drift away from the planet,
leaving it nothing but a barren wasteland. Understand.
She nodded hastily, and he snapped his fingers. She could feel herself being lifted of the ground, along with all the furniture, and the entire castle shifted away. All over the world was chaos. People who were in their houses slammed into the ceilings, people who were in the open flew into the blood-red sky. And suddenly it was over, and everything returned to normal. Satisfied? He asked her, and she nodded sadly, and tears were forming into her eyes. Naruto looked at her and frowned. Why was she so sad? What's wrong, Boa-chan? She looked crushed but couldn't answer at first. Eventually she began stuttering out an answer, despair showing in her voice. Amij just a toy to you and Naruto-kun? His frown lightened as he saw the problem, and he took her in his arms again. No, Boa-chan. You are not just a toy to me. If you were a normal 13 in a dozen type of woman, then yes, you would be nothing but a toy, but you are special. I can feel the sadness of your soul, and yet you remain strong. You have hidden yourself behind a strong exterior for a long time, and yet your resolve remains strong enough. You are beautiful and, in your own way, a symbol of perfection. Unless you give me reasons to turn you into nothing but a toy, you will never be a toy to me. She looked distressed at the semi-last statement, and he decided to soothe her fears quickly, nipping them in the bud lest they become a pain later on. Do not worry, Boa-chan. I won't turn you into a toy just for speaking out of turn or talking back to me. You would have to do something really drastic, like becoming evil and trying to manipulate me into doing what you want. I'm not manipulating your feelings either. The cold hard truth is that all women are attracted to the best genes for procreation, and as a god, my genes are obviously the best for any offspring, an exercise of futility in my opinion, as I will never give them a child with my genes. And while it is important for you to know right away that I will never be a one-woman man, as it is simply impossible for me to do so, you won't be just another woman to me. Any woman I tell my story must at least have some significance to me. She looked happy at that statement, but something confused her. Why won't you give anyone a child with your genes? Don't you want to continue your legacy and have the best for your offspring? He chuckled good-naturedly at her confusion before he decided to indulge her. And that is where you're wrong. I don't need to continue my legacy, for I will live forever. And a child with godly powers would be way too troublesome. Such powers would make them arrogant and most likely even evil. It is different for me because I was originally human. I have learned the values of friendships and morals. Even if all my friends turned out to be nothing but fakes, I have still learned what it is about. Because gods have no morality. Anything they do to humans will never be questioned, as humans are usually seen as nothing but cattle to the gods. My children, even if I tried to teach them that, could never learn the values of morals and the limits we put on our whims. They would not have the same restraints I have. For example, in this realm, I'm mostly leaving everyone alone, letting everybody do their own thing as long as nobody offends me. By comparison, my offspring would have probably either forced all the women in a gigantic harem within the first 3 days, or he would have dominated this entire planet within a week. And there is the fact that they will try to surpass me, to overthrow me. It would only make my life hell. She nodded her head in understanding. He made a good point. A being with infinite power without any form of restraint would be a living nightmare. It was silent for a while, before Naruto poked her in her side, causing her to eep. Now Boa-chan, I told you my story as I promised. Now no more stalling, it's your turn. She was silent for a while, gathering her resolve. How would he react, knowing that he was fraternizing with a... Would he send her back? Smite her? Or would he tell her that everything was all right? She severely hoped for the last option, but she was still afraid. She didn't want to lose this small amount of happiness that she had found with him. She sighed. She couldn't change the outcome anyway. She just had to hope for the best. All right then, when I was 12, the ship I was on was attacked, and I was captured by the Marines. I was then put into Rai and sold to one of the Tenryubito, along with my 2 sisters. I was there for 4 years, and they forced us all to eat a devil fruit for their own sick amusement. I was lucky that they feared my power enough to leave me a virgin, or at least long enough for me to be freed when Fishman Tiger set hundreds of us free. That's pretty much it. Naruto frowned at her. You're still hiding something from me, Boa-chan. Why? Because I'm marked. It cannot be removed. Telling you would make no sense. She spoke in a small voice, still sad at having to recall her past again. Take it off, was the only thing he said. She looked up at him bewildered, suddenly scared. What? Your upper clothing. Take it off, all of it. But, just do it. The coldness in his voice scared her, but caused her to comply nonetheless. She was very hesitant at the sudden change in his demeanor. Was he going to do that to her? She couldn't believe it, he was so nice to her. And there she stood, her normal clothing on her bottom, which barely covered anything anyway, her entire upper body bare, her eyes were hard, ready to shield herself from the horrible experience to come. She was turned away from Naruto and she heard him come closer. Suddenly she felt his bare flesh press into her back, and she couldn't help but blush from the hard muscles she felt. She felt his hot breath on her neck, teasing her skin, and unconsciously whimpered in need. One of his arms came around her, pulling her closer to him, melding her body seamlessly to his own, before he softly caressed her stomach. A fire lit gently in her stomach, one that could be labeled as arousal. Her arms slipped behind her, feeling his sides gently, slipping up slowly, and trying in vain to pull him closer. She shuddered as bolts of electricity shot through her body when he ate her neck, softly ing on it, further increasing the pleasure and causing a hickey to form on her neck. Her breath hitched in her throat before breaking out in a low as one of his hands climbed up softly and began to slowly and gently knead one of her s. The fire in her stomach lit brighter than it had ever been before. She let all reservations go as she just decided to enjoy the feeling of him caressing her delicate body softly, her whole body seeming to burn with an invisible fire that only his touch could put out. Her body seemed to jolt in agreement with his every touch. She ate out his name happily as he continued to softly dance his fingers all over her body, hitting spots that she didn't even know she had. It was glorious. He continued placing soft S over her neck, catering to her every physical need. What she didn't know, however, was that he didn't intend to do all that. He simply intended to examine the marking that caused her soul so much. However, upon seeing her body he was immediately distracted by her milky white skin. So he pressed his body into her almost on instinct, his body intent on exploring the silky white skin that pleased him so. He nuzzled his chin into her hair, inhaling her scent, sighing in delight as she smelled of peaches, the soft sweet scent dancing along the air. Her scent delighted him, so he continued his improvised advances on her. When he finally came back to his senses, he noticed that the woman under him was squirming happily under his touch, her delicate frame pressing back into his in delight. It wasn't planned, but he didn't mind as she was genuinely enjoying his touch. He lifted his lips from the spot on her neck that they had been caressing, and whispered huskily in her ear, shudders going down her skin at the hot breath she felt on her ears. Normally you would be right, Boa-chan, but you're forgetting something. Her dazed mind recognized the fact he was talking to her, but it cost her a while to process his words, and when she did reply her words were interlaced with another, giving her voice its own seductive quality, which caused a definite, if unnoticed reaction by the young god. And what's that, Naruto-kun? Her sentence ended in a whimper as his hands switched places, one now caressing her other while the other slowly danced over her toned stomach, twirling around her navel before softly stroking again. You're talking to a god, remember? I can do anything. She was sorely tempted to smack herself for her stupidity but decided not to, as that would probably stop his caresses. She let out another loud as his fingers started to gently tease her, causing them to stiffen immediately. Naruto-kun, how are you doing this to me? Naruto smiled against her neck, before lifting his head up again. I'm just that smexy Boa-chan, I do hope you like it. Beside herself she smiled widely, nodding slowly, as not to hit their heads together. Oh, yes, it's glorious, I've never felt anything like this before. His smile grew wider, and he slowly ate her neck in thanks, causing her to shudder and out in pleasure. Why thank you, Boa-chan, that is quite the compliment. So, do you want me to remove it? She took a few seconds to work up the composure for her answer, but answered nonetheless in a seductive voice. Oh yes, I would be most grateful if you did. He smiled, before turning her around, causing her to gasp, before his arms encircled her again and pulled her close, both of his hands meeting right where her mark was located. He pressed his forehead to hers, causing her blush to rise to atomic levels as she looked into his deep blue eyes. This might hurt for a little bit, all right. I promise to make it feel better immediately afterwards. She nodded and he instantly pulled her closer, her S pressed firmly against his chest, causing her to whimper in pleasure, before she heard him speak. Divine art of purification. Before she could even process the name he ate her full on the lips, causing her great pleasure. She didn't have time to wallow in it, however, as energy streamed from his hands into her back. She almost flinched at the burning pain on her back, although it only lasted for a second. The moment he was done, his hands moved from her mark, one coming to rest on her ass, and the other grab her head to pull her deeper into the pleasure was almost unbearable as he started to softly massage her rump, while his tongue darted into her mouth and did battle with hers, and what happened then caused her tongue to instantly submit to his own. He pushed healing and pleasure energy through her body from his mouth, the sore red skin on her back healing almost instantly, before becoming milky white again. This left only the pleasure energy as her body was racked by jolts of pleasure. Every sense was heightened, every pleasure magnified. His scent alone would have caused her to in pleasure. Her eyes slowly closed as she melted into his arms, her body melding perfectly with his own. Even though it lasted only for 5 minutes, they were lost for what seemed like hours in their own little world. When they finally parted, she leaned her head in the crook of his neck and asked, "Is it gone, Naruto-kun?" He roamed his hands over her back, trying to feel the rough surface of the mark, but finding none. "Yes, it is. Now your entire back is silky soft. It is a great improvement indeed." She laughed softly to herself, more a giggle really, making Naruto smile. It was an angelic sound, soothing and uplifting. "Your laugh sounds great, it's so soothing," he said, while nuzzling his face against hers, making her blush. "Nay, Naruto?" she asked, her voice suddenly hesitant and unsure. What is it? You really don't have a problem with me being a former?" She continued, her voice hopeful, but unsure. He smiled at her, which made her blush even more. "Of course I don't mind, Boa-chan. Why would you having been be a concern to me? It's a human concept after all, I think." He was cut off as Boa softly placed her lips on his, slowly deepening the as she made him walk backwards, until they both laid down on the bed, Boa on top of Naruto, ing him softly and passionately, and he was all right with that. With an absent-minded thought, he flashed the blankets on top of them both, while he roamed his hands softly over her back, occasionally gaining a soft into his mouth as a sign that she enjoyed it. They ed for about 30 minutes, before parting, and she laid her head in the crook of his neck gently. It was silent for a while in their embrace before she spoke again, her voice still soft, but with a hopeful and pleading undertone. "Nay, Naruto, can we stay like this tonight?" He smiled and laid a soft on her lips, not as passionate as the ones before, but it conveyed all his feelings to her perfectly. "Of course we can, Boa-chan, I would never send you away." She smiled and muttered a soft thanks, before falling asleep, the emotional stress finally taking its toll. She was mentally exhausted. Naruto found it strange. He had been in the same position with Robin not long ago, but this felt different. He felt safe even though nothing could ever harm him, and all his doubts and thoughts were chased away by the short puffs of hot air that caressed his face, indicating that he wasn't alone. His soul sung in joy. After a pleasant wake-up, which went accompanied by another make-out session, they had gone to breakfast. Before they went back to Naruto's room to relax together, Boa had decided not to wear any clothes on her upper body at all, confusing Naruto at first, before he surmised that she wanted to show off her back, which was now free of the taint that had been present for so long. He wasn't going to complain, however, as he sneaked glances at her wonderful orbs ever so often, which he found that she noticed, but the only fact that gave it away was that every time he did it, a warm smile would grace her face, for but a moment. Boa herself had indeed noticed his discreet glances, but what he didn't know was that she actually enjoyed the fact that he couldn't keep his eyes off of her. It wasn't the blatant perverse leering that all the men she'd ever met would do, because even from him that wouldn't be accepted. No, it was a subtle thing. She could feel that he knew it was wrong to do it, but he couldn't stop himself from looking every now and then. This was another reason she had decided to forego any upper clothing for the day. She wanted to test him, and she was pleased, from the fact that he didn't just take her whenever he looked. She had cemented the fact that she wasn't just a toy to him, firmly in her mind. However, after a while she started to become uncomfortable, the fire of desire still burning in her stomach, never having been sated yesterday. She was able to keep it at bay until now, because she still wasn't completely sure if he was the one yet, but now that she knew, it was getting brighter and brighter, and it made her tense. Naruto noticed that over the last hour she became increasingly tense. It was strange to him. There wasn't anything around here to be tense about, was there? After a while he couldn't watch it anymore. Her tenseness made him feel bad. He didn't know why exactly she was tense, and that made it worse. He felt as if he couldn't do anything about it. Deciding to take action, he turned towards Boa, who was sitting on the large couch next to him, and pulled her over to him gently. She was startled, of course, but she decided to let him do as he pleased. It was hard to think rationally when your desire is driving you mad after all. He spread his legs and pulled her in between them, allowing her to lean on his chest. She relaxed at the docile action, allowing herself to melt into him as his arms encircled her. This made her feel better for a while, but eventually she became tense again. She was raging an inner battle. One side was her reservations, screaming that she shouldn't because of the consequences, while the other, her desire, was screaming for her to go farther. Naruto noticed this, and frowned slightly, before he had a brilliant idea. He ate her cheek, shocking her out of her reverie, before he began giving her a massage, kneading her shoulders gently, while he whispered soothing words in her ear. She ate at the pleasurable feeling of her body unwinding, and smiled inwardly at the soothing words he spoke to her, telling her to relax, that she was safe. He smelled her scent once more, giving a content sigh. He loved her scent, it was sweet and refreshing. He started slowly working his hands lower as he searched for a specific spot, and when he found it he channeled a quick burst of energy through it, relishing in the loud of pleasure that was the result. It was glorious for Boa. The sheer pleasure she felt as knots in her back she never knew she had unwinded immediately. Unknown to Naruto, the mental battle was lessening as her desire took the advantage. Boa-chan, I noticed you were tense. What's wrong? You know you can tell me anything, right? She whimpered under his touch. She knew she could tell him anything, but she wasn't sure how he would react. Her thoughts were lost when Naruto sent energy through another spot on her back, basically forcing her to throw her head back in bliss as she ate his name in ecstasy. Naruto grinned into her hair as the tenseness was obviously fading from her body. Slowly, but surely, she started caving. Hi. Naruto-kun, I just wanted to ask. Never mind. Naruto frowned slightly but expertly hid his disappointment as he hit another spot, forcing her to cry out in bliss once again. His continued expertly kneading her back, hitting spots that made her cry out in ecstasy. He felt her tenseness slowly disappearing, still unknowing that he was deciding her mental battle with his tender caresses. Eventually he decided that she was relaxed enough and pulled her even closer, pulling her flush against his chest and leaning his mouth next to her ear while one of his hands traced softly along her shapely thighs, whispering comforting words into her ears. She melted completely into his touch, occasionally whimpering in need. As soon as she had decided on her course of action, she began building up her courage slowly, steeling herself to do what was required. Suddenly she jolted into movement, turning around in his arms, her chest pressing against his. She stifled she didn't have time for that right now. Without missing a beat she ate him deeply on the lips, surprising him pleasantly with the feel of her soft lips pressed on his. She ignored the shiver of pleasure that made its way up her back, settling for trying to pour all of her emotions into trying to convey her need. He could feel the desperation into and it confused him, but he decided to find the cause later and just enjoy the for now. He tilted his head to deepen and it was about to evolve into a full-blown make-out session when she pulled away and looked at him with eyes burning with lust and love, her eyes conveying the utmost sincerity. Take me, Naruto-kun, make me yours. She saw his eyes lit up in recognition, and the lust in his eyes was visible, but it was clearly more controlled than her own. He sat her up, confusing her and saddening her when he thought that he would refuse. He sighed and began to speak. Boa-chan, I do want to make you mine, but there is something you should know before you decide to let me take you. She nodded, slightly happy but still a bit apprehensive from the information. You know I am different from normal people. Every woman wants me, but that is something they can ignore if they truly hate me. However, you will not be able to. The moment I truly take you as mine, your body will no longer be able to gain any pleasure from another man. Furthermore, your body will want only me. This would normally not be a problem if your heart wants me as well, but if you eventually come to hate me due to my actions, your body will continue to crave me, and if you do not submit to those cravings, your body will suppress your mind. If you come to hate me and resist your body, you will lose yourself. You will be locked away in your own mind, as you become entirely submissive to me, nothing more than if you will. Before you decide to do this, you must consider if this is truly what you want, Boa-chan. Otherwise it will only ruin the rest of your life. And another thing you need to know is that as a god I will never be a one-woman man. If you understand what I mean, it is entirely possible that you'll eventually walk in seeing me making out with a woman you've never even seen before. You need to understand this, because if you're not prepared and you hate me for it, you will still become it to your own body. She froze, Her mind running 1,000 miles an hour. Was this what she truly wanted? Yes, she undoubtedly truly wanted this, but would she continue to want it for her entire life? Eventually she decided to take the risk. She didn't think it was even possible for her to hate the man who freed her from the burden that she had carried for so long. Yes. I'm sure, Naruto-kun, take me, make me yours and only yours. He searched her eyes for her determination. She drowned into the deep blues of his eyes, but when he found it he visibly brightened. All right then, Boa-chan, stand up and don't move, let me explore your body. She literally felt her body heating up at his words, but she complied, trying her hardest not to fidget in excitement as he slowly moved closer to her. Naruto walked over towards her slowly. First he buried his nose into her hair, inhaling the scent he loved and sighing in pleasure, secretly pleasing her immensely. He then roamed his eyes over her perfect face. An almost angelic expression was visible on her face. Her eyes were of a very dark green mixed with a dark shade of gray, deep as the eternal abyss. Her gentle features were framed by her silky soft raven hair. She watched him intently, clearly seeing the lust in his eyes. She didn't understand why he wouldn't just initiate the whole part, but she was more than pleased when she saw him roam all over her body, looking hungrily at what would soon only be his. He slowly and gently traced her entire upper body, all her curves, and of course her ample assets. He studied every inch of her upper body, noting all the sensitive spots he could find. That was of course the real reason he was doing this. True, he wanted to study her entire body, looking at what was only for him to see and touch, but the true goal here was to find all the pleasure spots in her entire body. He had already found that her neck was really sensitive, as were her belly and s. He needed them experimentally, noting what he was too caught up to notice yesterday. They were firm, yet soft. Perfectly perky and yet soft enough for him to knead them perfectly. He loved the feeling of the globs of flesh against his hands, the silky skin that framed them flowing around his hands as she edged softly. He brought his mouth to her left, mentally smirking when she shuddered at the hot breath he let out on it. He gave it an experimental F with his tongue, pleased at the reaction as she instantly whimpered for more. He clamped his lips around it, softly ing on it, making her out her delight, trying desperately to stay still under his caresses. He softly bit down before reverting to ing, inwardly smirking at her brief scream of ecstasy. He moved his hands down her body slowly, caressing her stomach and lower back at the same time. She whimpered in need. He slowly undid the upper layer of clothing covering her lower body, and she saw his eyes widen when he finally saw her long milky legs. She smirked a little. To think she even had that effect on a god was quite satisfying to her. His hands trailed down her legs softly, taking in every inch of her skin. He took his time, before he came back to her black panties, grinning mentally as he saw how moist they were. He prodded her through the flesh and her knees buckled while she unleashed aloud. He softly tugged on her panties and Boa blushed heavily as they came off. Naruto almost gasped. She had a clean shave, only the milky white color of her skin framing her entrance, the soft pink flesh glistening as if it was inviting him. First he was going to tease her, but when he smelled the scent coming off of her entrance he just couldn't do so. He told her to lay on the bed and she did, almost vibrating in her excitement of what to come. He came onto the bed as well, flashing all but his boxers away, and spreading her legs, before getting a great idea. He looked up at Boa, his voice full of mischief as he asked her in a seductive voice. "Hey, Boa-chan, wanna see a trick?" She was confused, but nodded anyway, and he stuck out his tongue at her for a couple of seconds before pulling it back in. "Alright, now watch closely." She did as he asked and a wisp of light escaped his mouth, before he stuck out his tongue again, and she gasped. It was about 10 inches in length now, but why did he make his tongue longer? He saw the questioning look in her eyes and he waggled his eyebrows suggestively while pointing towards her crotch with his tongue. Her eyes went wide, before an atomic blush lit up her face and her juices began flowing even faster. He went down to her crotch and the tip of his long tongue edged the outer edges of her flower slowly, relishing in the taste of her juices and the shudders that went through her body as his tongue sent shocks through her. The tip probed closer and wiggled its way inside of her slowly, before it settled. Naruto moved his face closer until his nose was touching her crotch, and shoves his entire tongue inside of her, mentally smiling in satisfaction at the scream of pleasure she let out. It wiggled deep inside of her, massaging her inner walls slowly. Boa saw stars. She was unable to do anything but scream and his name out wantonly in pleasure. If she had known it'd be that good, she would have jumped him the moment she saw him. She felt his tongue coiling around itself as it retracted, stretching her walls and caressing them as it moved in on itself, before uncoiling, shooting rapidly deeper inside of her, causing such wonderful friction. It repeated this process about 8 times before she just couldn't take it anymore. She saw spots at the edges of her vision, and all she could do was scream out his name in pleasure as she rode out her orgasm. For his efforts, Naruto was rewarded with a flood of her tasty juices, lapping everything up with vigor. He sniffed her intoxicating scent one more time before he looked up at her, reveling in the sight of her sweaty body and her glazed eyes, burning with lust. He kissed her softly, before whispering in her ear, "Did you like my trick?" She didn't react as she was still writing out the aftermath, so he busied himself, softly and gently groping one of her s, while ing softly on the other, causing her to whimper for more as she was finally starting to regain conscious thought. He smiled when he felt a hand on his scalp, first pushing him closer to her bosom, then pulling him up as she roughly ed him, trying to pull him as close as she possibly could before gasping, her eyes widening when she felt the size of his still-clothed tool grinding against her most sacred spot. She flipped them over, so that she was on top, grinning seductively at his questioning stare, before she lowered herself down to his waist. Her jaw dropped mentally as she saw the tent he was sporting. She shyly reached out and grabbed it through the cloth, finding that her hand wasn't able to reach all around it, drooling at the thought of having that big thing pounding into her relentlessly. Stealing her resolve, she softly tugged on his boxers, finding it quite hard to remove with the size of the equipment it was hiding. Finally managing to take it off, she almost lost her composure. He was almost an entire foot long, and with the girth he was packing, it was almost unreal. She grabbed him softly, slowly moving her hands over the entire length, slowly trying to rub the entire length. She was spurred on when she heard an encouraging from him. She moved closer and fed the tip of her tongue over the bulbous head, grinning as she heard another. Encouraged, she slowly clamped her lips over the head and started ing softly while twirling her tongue around it like it was a giant lollipop. He put his hand in her hair, caressing her scalp softly, encouraging her to go on, and she did. She slowly and carefully bobbed her head up and down, swirling her tongue along his length softly. She could feel the pulsing his heartbeat sent through it. It was weirdly erotic for her. She tried to deep throat him, but she failed, her inexperience showing as she failed to suppress the gag reflex. But Naruto didn't mind. He was glad that she would try it for him. She continued on for quite a long while, eventually growing annoyed at his stamina, and decided to up the ante. Upping her suction while she bobbed, she was rewarded with a bit of pre-cum leaking out. She found the liquid to be slightly salty, but extremely enjoyable to her taste buds. She was eager to taste the real thing and pulled out until only the tip was in her mouth, ing as hard as she could and massaging the head with her tongue. Shortly after, Naruto groaned out her name and a flood of semen shot into her mouth. She was a bit surprised, but as soon as the liquid reached her tongue, she brightened up and began gulping it down greedily. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. If she had to describe it, it would be something like a mix between tasting the very essence of pleasure and tasting like different kinds of fruit at the same time. The pleasure from the liquid almost made her cream herself. Savoring the last bit in her mouth before reluctantly swallowing it, and looking up at Naruto, an excited expression on her face as she saw him looking quite pleasured. He was smiling warmly down at her, before he took over. He flipped them over again, looking at her wide eyes with a lusty expression on his face. He pressed his lips to her in A, before positioning himself by her entrance, looking at her with a questioning gaze, obviously asking for her permission. She looked him in the eyes for about a minute, searching for any trace of ill will within his eyes, wanting to be completely sure that this was not some evil plot to get her as A. When she found none, she smiled a true smile, momentarily stunning Naruto as it made her look even more beautiful, before she nodded at him, causing him to snap out of his daze. He went to work, making sure to move very slowly as the tip of his began to split her outer lips. She ed in bliss as his tip teased her sensitive entrance, and he moved further. Soon, he came to her hymen, waiting for a while as she adjusted to having him inside of her, before he sheathed himself to the hilt inside of her at once, hoping to get the pain out of the way. She winced in pain and would have screamed out loud had Naruto not brought his lips to hers, catching the scream in his mouth. His hands went to work immediately, teasing her s while he ed her tears of pain away. Eventually she calmed down and nodded to him. He slowly began to move inside of her, satisfied when instead of a cringe she only offered a loud of bliss. He pulled out until only the tip was still inside of her, before slowly and painstakingly moving back in, reveling in her screams of delight as he did so. He managed to build up a slow rhythm, with her ing and screaming in pleasure, and him groaning in exertion. Boa-chan. So. Tight. Naruto-kun. Harder. Faster. Kami. Naruto hummed in response while he wrapped one arm around her, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes with the other. Yeah? What is it? She smiled and stroked his face softly with her hand, almost giggling as his face pressed back into her hand, but she had to be serious now. What if some woman wants to take you from me? What if she wants to drive us apart? Naruto smiled and ed her forehead. Not going to happen, Boa-chan. She looked confused, understandable he supposed. She didn't know the human mind and genetics as well as he did. Why not, Naruto-kun? You said before that any woman would automatically want you, so why won't they try to drive us apart? Naruto smiled again and sighed, propping them both up as she sat in his lap, not perturbed by the fact that they were bought still and that this gave him quite the view. Well, you see, Boa-chan, this is all because of human genetics. You need to know that all males are genetically programmed to want to spread their seed, therefore making every male desire multiple mates, while females don't have this urge, rather they have the urge to find a worthy male, one capable of giving her offspring the best genes. You must also know that in the past the human genes were much stronger, much better if you will. Therefore many women would flock to the persons with exceptionally strong genes. This created polygamy. And because of the strong genes the women didn't mind it. But when the human genes slowly weakened, they eventually didn't found the urge to be quite as strong, since no exceptionally strong genes were to be found, and they didn't want to put up with polygamy anymore. Most people think that it was cultural development that eventually banished polygamy to obscurity. It was not, however. You see, the stronger the genes of a man, the more a woman will be able to accept from him, so to speak. Which means that if a person has really strong genes, women today still won't mind to share him, since they are not originally possessive. This only came on when the genes weakened. Don't you think it's strange that you were able to put up so easily with the thought of me having a lot of women? And don't you think it's strange that while male gods cannot be monogamous, female gods can? The whole reason is because my genes are very strong, and with no limit put on these urges by normal human laws and such, it is impossible for me to ignore. Female gods, however, don't have that problem. They still only have the urge to find a single worthy male. In other words, any female that is attracted to me won't try to have me for themselves, they will simply try to have me, period, because my genes are the strongest in existence. They will only try to join my harem, and I will only let them if they are worthy of my attention. Were I a normal male, then you would have to worry, but since I'm not, you don't have anything to worry about. Understand? Naruto ended the explanation with a soft to her forehead, knowing that she was still busy processing the information, and he didn't want to ruin the process by disturbing her thoughts with a true. Eventually Naruto literally saw an expression of understanding crossing her face, before she smiled at him and nodded, upon which Naruto finally laid a deep on her lips, his tongue darting in and out of her mouth, causing her to incontinent. Eventually they had to get up when Naruto was notified that the Gorosei had a new mission for him. After eating a nice breakfast and generally just taking his sweet time, he teleported himself over to the council room and received another mission. Apparently a huge group of pirates, almost 4,000 in number, had taken to land, and were preparing to attack the capital of the desert island known as Arabasta. They had only received the intelligence moments ago, and they couldn't make it in time with a regular armed fleet, so Naruto was sent in. He agreed, purely because it would be fun to him, and now here he was, standing alone in front of a giant army of pirates. He had been informed that none of them had any ability worth speaking of, and he was quite disappointed but came nonetheless. The heat was immense, the air was wavering constantly, as if you were over a fire. They had stopped when they saw him, demanding to know who he was. He had scoffed at them and said, "I am Uzumaki Naruto, sent here by the Gorosei since their army wouldn't be able to get here on time. In other words, I am your deaths." They immediately became angry, and one of their number rushed towards him foolishly. In his anger, he had reappeared behind him, and sliced his head clean off with a wind blade. They all watched in barely contained horror as the head of one of their members was mercilessly cut off. The horror soon turned into anger, and they charged as one. Naruto wasn't impressed. They were nothing more than mere grunts. trained only in the very basics of battle, things that were common sense, such as, don't charge into the attacks of your opponents, don't let the enemy get behind you, and other such basic things. He almost had to laugh. They thought that they would be able to defeat him? He sighed and fed his hands through his hair, forming several extremely powerful, yet small bombs in his hand. As he did so, he flung them towards his opponents with an overdramatic movement of his hand. They didn't notice due to the size of the bombs, but as soon as they hit the crowd they exploded, taking about 500 people with them, and wounding 340 others. Naruto saw that they were more cautious now, but it hardly mattered. He strode forward slowly, his gait not wavering in the slightest as they got their nerve back, and started to charge him again. He held up one hand, about 400 black orbs forming in front of him, before spreading out and charging towards the army again. He only spoke as the first orbs had already hit. Gravity impact. For a time nothing seemed to happen, even though all the orbs had found targets by now. Then Naruto spoke again. Crush. It was a gory sight. Bodies imploded equal to the number of orbs launched. Once the orbs had hit, they melded into the bodies of their victims, causing no discomfort other than a cold shiver of dread. The orbs made their way to the very center of the victim's body, and once there they lay dormant, waiting for the command. And when it was given, they started exercising extreme amounts of gravity on their victims. Their bodies couldn't hope to withstand the immense pressure and were destroyed. Naruto didn't wait for them to regain their composure, and held up both his hands this time, forming a single black orb in front of him, and he tossed it in the middle of the group while saying, "Gravity distortion." They tried to scatter, but it was of no use. They were nowhere near fast enough to escape as the next words were spoken. Black hole. Instantly a ripple went through their forces. Not long after, a giant vortex of the purest black reached out from the small ball. The very particles of light seemed to form a swirl as everything was pulled into the unholy vortex. Its event horizon surrounding a 50-meter radius in a corona of light, the air whipped around them as it was drawn towards the mass of black, vanishing in nothing, like a giant drain. Naruto cancelled the black hole, not wishing it to wipe all his enemies of the face of the earth. The corona vanished as the immense pull upon it was stopped. The entire thing didn't last longer than 3 seconds, and yet over 2,000 people were reduced to nothing, and as the flash of light cleared there was nothing but that same black ball. However, when it was first composed of energy, it was now composed of nothing but very compressed mass. Naruto ignored their expression of fear and horror and continued walking forward slowly, muttering under his breath as he waved his left arm towards the remnants of the army, now just under 1,500 strong. Devastate. The reaction was instantaneous. An invisible force crashed down upon all who stood before him, crushing their bodies until they were nothing but red marbles, the blood being expelled from their bodies first by the immeasurable pressure, before it was forced to solidify around the small sphere, coating it in a layer of solid blood. The battle was extremely short. It was over in under 2 minutes, nearly 4,000 men completely wiped out by a being of immeasurable power. The army gone. Naruto went to the leader of this country to stop the second threat. Alubarna Palace. Naruto flashed into existence, wearing only a pair of black jeans with a white belt and his white fedora, shocking both the king and his daughter, who were having a hushed conversation until that time. The king regained his composure first and spoke, in as royal a tone as he could muster. "Who are you and what are you doing here? We are in the middle of a crisis. I do not have time for idle chatter." Naruto kept his face neutral, but a flash of rage at this insolence could clearly be seen in his eyes. It made them glow an eerie blue. Nonetheless, he answered the man. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I was asked by the Gorosei to take care of this little problem you had with a pirate army, since they could not send an army large enough to stop the pirates in time." The king couldn't keep a straight face. They sent a kid to deal with that large of an army? Ridiculous. It just wasn't possible. And despite the grave situation his country was facing, he could not stop it. He burst out laughing. "They sent you. Ha 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 ha, cough wheeze. Ridiculous. To even think that I would believe that. Ha 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 ha." Naruto had enough. He may be on a mission to save this country, but he wasn't going to stand for such insolence. He released his wings and a halo formed above his head. His aura roared and filled the air with unbelievable pressure. The king immediately shut up and could only stare in shock as the youngster suddenly gained wings and a halo. His eyes suddenly glowed a bloody red color and he almost couldn't breathe from the overwhelming aura of power. Oddly enough, his daughter didn't seem at all impeded by the great pressure filling the room. yet she was still staring in shock at the sudden change in the boy. A deep flush forming on her face as she admired the boy that seemed to be burning with an immeasurable power. The real shock, though, came when he spoke. His voice so heavy and divine that it shook through the entire palace like an earthquake. "Hold your tongue, mortal. I may be on a mission to prevent harm from coming to this city, but that can easily change if you provoke me further." With that the aura vanished, as did the glow of his eyes, yet it did nothing to calm the fear in the heart of the old king. It took him several minutes to work up the courage to nod shakily to the teen. After which the teen nodded back and the tense atmosphere visibly relaxed. "Right. Anyway, the army is dead. I just finished murdering them, but that is not why I am here." The king looked confused, and Naruto sighed and started to elaborate. "They went down way too quickly. There's no way that they would have been able to take this city with the army protecting it, let alone keep it afterwards, so that means." It was quiet for a while as they tried to understand what he was implying, until the realization hit them like a rock. "You mean?" "Yes, the only way that they would have been able to keep this city was if the army was disorganized, and the only way to make that happen is to assassinate the one in charge, which would happen to be you. Since no one with an ability was present in the army, this means that another person will come soon, since they were quite close to the city. Your death would have been discovered when the army was first sighted, and they would be too panicked by your death to fight back properly, and even if they weren't, their morale would be crushed. Normally after that comment of yours I would leave you to rot, but since my mission is to stop this invasion as it is called, even if the army is dead I cannot let them murder you. And now, we wait." He snapped his fingers and a pure white throne with ornaments of pure gold appeared and he sat down upon it, waiting for the enemy. He didn't have to wait long. Within 5 minutes a window in the room was silently opened and a figure clad in black sneaked in. He was just about to attack the king and princess when he felt a deathly aura of power behind him. His eyes only had time to widen in shock before he was vaporized by a searing hot beam of light. The king and the princess looked at him with bugged-out eyes, never having seen him move, and only just spotting the assassin before he was reduced to ashes. Naruto flashed over to Vivi's side and pulled her into a deep, leaving her dazed, before giving a two-fingered salute and vanishing for the last time, leaving a thoroughly enraged king and a dazed princess behind. After notifying the Gorosei of the completion of his mission, he went back to his palace to rest. He awoke in an empty room, a feeling of sudden dread overcoming him. Enlarging his presence throughout the entire castle, he found a sight he would have never wished to see. His lover lay there, not just dead, but completely decimated, and while he was devastated he couldn't help but notice a residual energy in the air, and before long he recognized it as a soul. But something was off about this soul. When it hit him his face turned into intense rage. "Those bastards, they destroyed her soul. Now I can't resurrect her." The whole world felt his agony and his rage. Everywhere the sky darkened and thunder rang out as the clouds turned a blood red, and an ominous voice rang throughout the entire planet. "Foolish mortals, you have angered me for the last time. If whoever has done this to my lover does not admit it within 1 hour, this entire realm shall feel my wrath." While the normal people did not recognize the danger they were in, the Gorosei certainly did, and they knew that they were Ed. Immediately all the Marines were ordered to search for the person in question, although they knew that they would never be successful, since they didn't even have a description of the offender. The Straw Hats recognized the voice of their friend even though it sounded darker somehow, and could not help but feel afraid, because even though they felt his pain, the terror that overtook them at the tone in his voice could not be fought against. Like a helpless child screaming in terror as a dark monster of unimaginable power bears down to tear its throat out. They were stunned, but Nami and Robin were the most affected. Their faces were frozen in agony, the unrelenting pain finding into their hearts, their inevitable doom not even registering as a priority for them. The pain of the one they love echoed through them like radar. They knew that they were probably going to die, but they just couldn't find it in them to care. 45 minutes later. "Only 15 minutes left, foolish mortal. Even if I want to know your identity, I can at least be sure that you will be dead soon." The Marines were frantically searching for the culprit, but it was futile. The only lead they had that whoever it was killed Boa Han, and that is not much to go on, especially if this person didn't tell anybody about it. Alabasta, Imperial Palace. In the palace a lone figure sat on a throne obscured by darkness, a devious grin slowly covering his entire face, his entire visage glowing in maliciousness. "Boast all you want, you bastard. The dog that barks the loudest has the weakest bite. And you bark loud indeed. No one tries to intimidate me. I am the king. 0 hour. Prepare yourself, mortals. No extensions, no forgiveness. It is time to pay. With an evil smirk on his face, Naruto rose to the sky slowly, reaching for power inside him that he has never unleashed before, the 9 Biju. Come out to play, my servants, join me as I revel in the destruction of those who oppose me. 9 colored streams of energy shot out from him at tremendous speeds, each orbiting the planet, spreading themselves evenly throughout the globe, impacting the earth with a terrible tremble, shaking the planet to its very core. 9 gigantic animal-like shapes with a different number of tails each rose from the smoking craters, roaring out to their master's call, shockwaves of sound traveling throughout the planet, uprooting trees, picking up houses and causing landslides everywhere. And then they brought out their tails. Huge waves ravished the surface of the oceans, mountains crumbled and people screamed out in terror. Naruto searched the minds of the people, trying to find his nemesis. Although the realm was already doomed, he still wanted to see the look in that bastard's eye when he finished him off and sent him to his own special brand of hell. To his shock, he found out that it was the king of that country he saved, and rushed there at full speed, not caring that he was going straight through the earth to get there. After a short while he felt the stone becoming bedrock and he knew that he arrived. Luckily this desert was mostly unharmed due to the nature of the initial assault. He was really far from the sea after all. He burst out from the ground, an enormous dark red aura surrounding him, his eyes glowing a blood red with pure black pupils as if he was the devil himself. His eyes could see through the palace. Seeing the man start as the shockwave hit him, he formed a very long energy blade and cut the entire palace in half, before decimating the part that his nemesis was not in with an energy blast. He could see the immense fear in his prey and he relished in it, relished in the thought of causing pain to he who had taken her from him. Wings from the purest black shot from his back, his face contorted in a demonic snarl, and he flew at the castle, visible as nothing more than a streak of pure darkness across the sky. He flew into the castle, crashing through the walls between him and his prey, before crashing through the last wall and, making sure not to kill him instantly, grabbed him by the throat and pinned him against the wall, before looking at the soon-to-be dead man with an evil grin from hell. He could easily smell that the man had soiled himself in fear, and he was disgusted at the pathetic whimpers coming from him. Pathetic mortal. Did you really think you could stand against a god? Know that even after I kill you, you will be sent to my own personal version of hell. The pathetic man before him saw fit only to mewl in fear, only for the dark god to lop off his arms and legs in one bright flash, miraculously stopping the bleeding, although he did nothing against the pain. Speak, mortal, I want to hear the reason before exact my vengeance. The king felt compelled to answer, even though the pain was blinding his reasoning. No one tries to intimidate me and gets away with it. Naruto's face looked surprised for a single second, before turning into a facade of bloody murder. That was the reason? You impudent scum, I cannot even think of an insult that would befit you. With their conversation finished, Naruto proceeded to slowly dismantle the king, lopping of slices at one time, and slowly burning holes into him at the next, and through all this the king was kept alive, until Naruto decided to finish it with a huge blast of black energy, completely obliterating his entire body, before continuing on with the destruction of the realm, because while the Biju were indeed powerful, they didn't possess the ability to actually destroy a planet. Render it useless. Sure, through mass destruction, but they couldn't amass the power Naruto was about to use. Feel my wrath, puny mortals. He recalled his servants and summoned a continuous beam of energy about 50,000 miles long, and slashed the planet in half, forever destabilizing the planet, and denying them any hope for salvation. The end. Now we will see you in the next video.